or very simple agents that can do single tasks. We innovated and we went further ahead to something around workflows, where you can look at entire business processes that involve multiple knowledge experts to be orchestrated to provide true efficiency. That was the goal of version 2. Let's take it to the next level. Let's allow us to really look at entire processes. The core features of version 2, firstly, is tools and integrations, and it's not just integrating to common software services. You can connect to any of your enterprise knowledge bases or enterprise SaaS solutions. We do this through integrations and tools. We use something called prompt banks. I think everyone's very aware that if you prompt badly, you get bad outputs. So we now allow you to save prompts and reuse them across entire workflows. So you can retain that knowledge across your agentic workflows. We still have the concept of knowledge experts, but now you can really map them to different parts of the business. They're not just constrained to a simple chat. They can go into bigger workflows. And then we have the agent builder. And I'll just click through a few of these features. So we talk about personas. That's really building out what is the agent actually going to do for a business in that specific task. That then goes into what we call knowledge experts, which is these basically single task agents that can be pulled into different parts of a process. Talked about tools and integrations, pulling those into your workflow so you can connect into all of your systems. And then it all comes together with something we call Conductor, which is the orchestration engine. That's how you pull all these tools, integrations, knowledge experts into one workflow that can provide proper efficiency. As I said, this isn't just a platform that you could do this on. This is a full service that we would come in with our experts, figure out where are the real bottlenecks and points of failure within a business, and then obviously go out and build the agents that can provide those efficiency gains. And above all, we look at security and governance as a key part of the service. Everything is auditable. We have proper RBAC and encryption. We're ISO certified. And due to our partnership with Cibo, who is actually the only sovereign AI provider in the UK, we can do fully sovereign AI so that you're not having to rely on any hyperscalers or public environments where you don't want to put sensitive data into. We've worked on some very interesting use cases over the last 12 months, all the way from simple prompting use cases to very complex workflows. This includes stuff like document drafting and analysis for like legal contracts, KYC automation, which is quite popular obviously in the trust world. Market sentiment analysis has picked up a lot of traction. Legal clause generation and comparison to help lawyers be more efficient. E-discovery, board pack generation, and financial analysis. Those are some of the key use cases we've seen a lot of success in, and I'm sure a few of them will resonate with the people in the room today. Finally, one of the biggest learnings we took in the last 12 months is that every business is unique. There's not a one-size-fits-all platform that you can just deploy into an environment. All of a sudden, you have agentic AI. Agentic AI is all about the coming together of deep domain expertise and experts that can build and configure these agents. When these two experts come together, you can really make magical agents happen. So I think today we'll be having a lot of discussions around what are the use cases that resonate with you and your businesses. And I'm really looking forward to sharing more on that. I'd like to now invite Mark up for the keynotes. Cool, thank you.
All right, hi everyone. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here because it seems like there's a lot of different opinions in the crowd about, or a lot of different people who have different opinions about agentic AI and how it can actually impact the world. And this is something that I think about an awful lot. But coming at it from an academic perspective, you know, I'm often in the weeds about the technology and how it actually works. And so, it'll be nice to actually get a broader view of how the impact of these technologies can actually be. And so I'm looking forward to talking about that in the panels later on as well. But for now, what I wanted to talk about was a bit just about the background of agentic AI. And I wanted to maybe talk about a few paths that the developments of agentic AI can take in the next few years. Because if we want to answer the question, what kind of effect is this technology going to have, we first have to understand what it can do and what its limitations are and where it might go in the next few years. So there are three scenarios that I can basically, that I've clustered a little bit. I call them snap, crackle, and pop. And I think they're all completely possible, but it's hard to tell which one is the most likely. So the snap, I would say, is the one where everything breaks and it isn't actually as useful as people expect it to be. the crackle, where it's got some signs of sparks of intelligence that can be useful already, and then the pop, which is what you hear about mostly in the news, which is where things really accelerate very quickly. I think the pop scenario is the one that's been driving a lot of the investments recently, even though, as you might guess, my view is that the crackle is probably the most likely one. So yeah, it was also interesting to hear about Clairo in the previous 10 minutes. So I've actually learned a lot about what Clairo does, because compared to what's on the website. And what's interesting actually is that I think that, so I'm saying this because I guess this presentation is completely independent from what you just said, but I think that there is some kind of overlap and consistency between. So that's interesting, and it's also interesting to see in the rest of the day how much these independent opinions actually fit with each other. So to introduce myself, my name is Mark van der Wilk. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Oxford. I run a research group together with a whole bunch of PhD candidates who help me develop the research that I do. The research that I actually do is on the mathematical foundations of what learning actually is. So I'm trying to create the next generation of learning algorithms that will provide fundamentally new capabilities to machine learning that the current algorithms of today don't have. So I want to make machine learning more automatic. So I want there to be less need for human intervention and human engineering for learning to work well. So currently, the Anthropics and the OpenAIs have loads of really smart people working on their AIs, and they're constantly building and tweaking these models in order to make them work. And I'm trying to look for mathematical principles that can get this trial and error out of the development of machine learning algorithms. I also want the learning to be more robust. So current machine learning, one of the downsides, well, one of the powers, but also the downsides, is that it relies on a huge amount of data. So in order to get the results that machine learning currently offers, it basically had to see examples that were really similar in a certain way to what you give it to them at test time. And there's a big debate in machine learning currently to how smart these models actually are, or are they just giving us things that these models have seen before in the training data set? We don't know, simply because no human has ever read the entire internet. We don't know, where on the spectrum we lie. But I think that we could do a lot more with the large amount of data that we currently have. And finally, I want to make machine learning more efficient. So, for example, more energy efficient. So one of the things that I think is really bad about the current machine learning algorithms is that if you've got a data set and you train your ChatGPT on it once, then you've got your model, and then that model is fixed, and it can't really learn anything else after that. I mean, you can do a little bit of fine-tuning and stuff like that, but eventually you get worse performance if you keep doing these fine-tuning procedures. And if you get a little new chunk of data, then in order to perform optimally on the old data and the new data, you have to create a whole ChatGPT again from scratch. So this is why when interacting with these chatbots, you often hear these messages being said by these chatbots saying, I've got a knowledge cutoff at December of 2024, and I don't really know anything that happened after that. And so what OpenAI then does is, come October 2025, a whole lot of new stuff has happened on the internet, a lot of new news articles. It'll just take that extra data, add it to the data that it previously has, and then create a new ChatGPT from scratch. So this is completely inefficient. And one of the things that I'm working on is machine learning methods that can continuously learn from new examples and learn from their mistakes and get better as time goes on without having to retrain from scratch. Now, this is basically a fundamentally different method, and I've got things that are interesting, but it doesn't currently work at the scale of ChatGPT style models. And that's why I'm at a university rather than working at one of these tech companies, because I actually get the freedom to develop these kind of things. I will occasionally work on industry problems as a consultant. And one thing that I'm also interested in, sort of as a side interest, is how we can create LLM tools that actually make humans smarter and augment capabilities rather than take over and completely automate things. And in particular, I think that this might be helpful for combating fake news, but that's something else that I'd love to talk about later on. Okay, so let's get back to the topic of the talk. Basically, what's the trajectory of agentic AI in the next few years? So in order to understand the trajectory in the future, let's first look at what the trajectory and what the predictions have been about AI in the past. And maybe to start a little bit pessimistically, I'm actually quite optimistic about the progress, but one could be very pessimistic, right? So, artificial intelligence has a long history. Basically, since the dawn of artificial intelligence, people have been overestimating its pace. So Geoffrey Hinton, he's the Nobel Prize winner from last year. He's considered one of the godfathers of artificial intelligence. In 2016, I was there at the conference where he said it. He said, people should stop training radiologists now. It's completely obvious that in 5 years' time, deep learning is going to do better. So 5 years ago, or in 5 years' time was 2021, we were nowhere near that in medical imaging. And so I think he's completely wrong. What the media doesn't often include is that, after a few words, he actually says it might be 10 years. So that would make it 2026. So technically, based on what his prediction was, he's still got 1 year for radiologists to become obsolete, but I think that's unlikely to happen. Another quote that I like was from the Ford CEO of Mark Fields, who said that in 2021, they're going to be producing cars without even any steering in there. The driver's seat would just be another passenger seat in the car, and the car would be completely autonomous. We're still not there yet. One thing that I particularly like is a list of predictions for autonomous Tesla vehicles by Elon Musk on Wikipedia. So they basically went through his, everything that he said in the media, and then checked whether it was actually correct or not. And you can basically see by the color of this column that he's only been correct about one thing, and that was a prediction that he made on the same day that his company was releasing the software that he was So it's not really much of a challenge to find something that that Elon Musk says that can be falsified. Doesn't mean you shouldn't take them seriously, but don't take the predictions at face value. Another one that I really like. So Anthropic, I think, is a very interesting company, and I think they're quite serious about what they do. But 7 months ago, Dario Amodei, so the CEO, was basically saying that in 3 to 6 months, AI is going to be writing 90% of the computer code. And then he said in 12 months' time, basically, no software engineers will be needed anymore because AI is going to be writing all computer code. That was 7 months ago. That was 1 month ago, and we still have software engineers, so that's not happening. And then another example, which I like, is Neil Lawrence. He's a professor at Cambridge. He was using one of these coding assistants to do coding while he was on a flight to a conference. And if you take a look here, you can't really see it, but I can't zoom in. That's a command that would have essentially removed all of his document folder. And that's just something that the LLM, suggested he should execute. And he saw it just before he pressed enter and executed this code. But if he had pressed that button, all of his documents would have been gone. And the LLM apologized afterwards when he confronted the LLM about doing this. But I think that shows you where we are. Now, what's interesting is that at the same time of overestimating the pace of AI, we also have to take stock and think about how far and how fast we've come, right? So even though we were promised fully self-driving cars in 2021, even 10 years ago, would you imagine that we would have actually been able to actually drive around in a driverless car? So this was me a year and a half ago, before the release of Waymo's robotaxi fleet. One of my friends works there, and he took me on a demo ride in one of these cars. And I was sitting in the passenger seat, looking to my left. There's no one there, So this actually works now. Sure, maybe you can't buy them. Maybe Ford isn't making them at scale yet, but we do have self-driving cars. And I think 10 years ago we wouldn't have predicted that. We also have large language models that can actually help us to do maths. My colleagues in the maths department they say that they talk to ChatGPT an awful lot because it has just seen all branches of mathematics that have ever been written about. And it's helpful. They might not get details right. They might not be super creative in a certain way, or they might make big mistakes in the proof. But it's still helpful to sort of talk to something that's seen this kind of stuff. It's read more books than any human ever can in their entire life. And of course, the fact that these tools can do any coding has drastically improved the reach that coding has to people who can't code, and they can now do a lot more things. So this is really a breathtaking pace. So the conclusion that I draw from this is that while you probably shouldn't take the actual dates that people predict seriously, because they don't know when something will happen, I think you should take seriously the fact that someone predicts something is possible. So to summarize this, I think we can say that we don't know when something will happen, when a capability will be developed, but we know that it will. And I think this is maybe the biggest conclusion that I would, if you believe me, that I would remember from this talk. That's certainly what I use when trying to project forward what might be a good thing to work on next. So just to emphasize again how the timeline actually worked out, rather than look at these incorrect predictions, we've really gone incredibly quickly from the development of core pieces of technology to the use of them in the latest and greatest tools that actually get used by people. So you might have all heard the phrase of transformer architecture or attention mechanisms. So this was basically a key paper that allowed these neural networks to work on language. And this was only developed in 2017. So I started my PhD in 2012. That's when machine learning was still a relative backwater. Nobody really believed in neural networks. That was the year that AlexNet was developed. So that was a neural network that could actually analyze images, and that's where the pop really started. 5 years later, there was an architecture that was very new, really helped a lot. And then, 2 years after that, you had GPT-2, which was deemed too dangerous to release by OpenAI because of its possibility of generating huge amounts of fake news. So that's the moment when OpenAI became closed AI. And then a few years after that, you had ChatGPT released, which actually turned this little experiment into something that was useful and popular amongst people all over the world. In 2024, they released GPT-4, which couldn't just interact by text, but could also see. So they had this amazing demo where they had a phone in someone's pocket, and it could look around the room and sort of see how many people were there and what kind of room it was, and where you left your keys and all that kind of stuff. And that takes us to where we are now, 2024, 2025, where we've got these models that can interact with the world using different modalities like text and image and audio. And that sort of opens up the possibility for agentic AI, which is basically AI that doesn't just analyze the world, but also takes decisions and acts in the world. And this is what you need for truly autonomous deployment of AI systems. And I think we've got all the perception systems ready in these multimodal models, and that creates an incredible opportunity now for figuring out what you can actually do with these models. So that's going to be the next big challenge, to actually make this useful and deploy these systems in the world. In terms of people have measured what our progress actually is, and again, the progress is astounding. So this is like a qualitative thing that you probably have seen in the news and experienced yourself if you use these models. But quantitatively, these models have also increased incredibly quickly. So, back in 1998, you could barely recognize an image, whereas if you look at the speed of improvement on, for example, code generation, so we're almost at superhuman level of solving coding exercises. That's different from actually, coding up an application, but little coding competition exercises they're getting very good at. Maths, these LLMs are getting better than approaching human performance at an astounding rate. And a lot of exams as well. You know, if you look at the difference between GPT 3.5, that's what ChatGPT was based on, and GPT-4, GPT 3.5 could be relatively sensible, but would totally fail a bar exam, whereas GPT-4 gets at the 90th percentile, so it's really quite good. And the GRE, these are exams that I sat when I applied to grad school in the US. It gets at the 99th percentile, so that means that, if I saw those numbers from a PhD applicant, I would be pretty impressed. And that happened in the space of, basically a year, going from 63rd to 99th percentile. I think that's a breathtaking pace. And this has led to really some quite, claims that, if they're true, would be astoundingly impactful. So in Silicon Valley and around these tech companies that are developing artificial intelligence, people have literally said that we will have artificial general intelligence by 2026, 2027. So that's next year. And this timeline is actively suggested by CEOs of these AI companies like OpenAI and Anthropic. So they are literally predicting that we will have PhD level intelligences next year. And gosh, if you really think about the implications of that, that is pretty astounding. And in Silicon Valley, people are going a little bit crazy about this. So if you look at valuations of these big tech companies, people are putting their money where their mouth is, and they're investing hundreds of billions of dollars into this bet. And the runways that they're giving these companies are basically 2 years. So you give OpenAI tens of billions of dollars, and they burn through that within 2 years. So that basically, if you look at the investment, that's sort of consistent with a belief in AGI by 2026, 2027. Yeah. You might be able to guess what my opinion about that is. I don't think it's... Yeah, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so before we form an opinion about whether this is crazy or not, maybe we should delve into a little bit about how an LLM actually works and what actually drives these advances in AI, and what's the evidence that people actually use to make these investment decisions. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to briefly mention was, how does an LLM work? So LLMs are still the backbone of these AI tools, and where do LLMs get their quote-unquote intelligence from? I don't even think it's quote-unquote. I think it's intelligence. I'm just going to call it intelligence. It might be a different kind of intelligence than human intelligence, but let's just start with that. So the way that these large language models are trained is that a neural network basically looks at a context window of words. So that could be any kind of sentence that's taken out of a book or a website or any kind of training data. And then the only thing that it does is it predicts what the next word in a sentence is. And then it predicts the next, and then it predicts the next, and then it predicts the next. And the neural network is basically encouraged to get the next word right. So, for example, there are a lot of books that might have the sentence, "What is the capital of France?" in it. And then when a neural network hasn't been trained yet, it might pick a completely random word, which is likely to be wrong. But then the data says, actually, it's Paris. And then the neural network basically adjusts its output to give a higher probability of giving the word Paris in the future. And then it predicts the next word in the sentence, and so on. And that is basically what is the only bit of technology that's behind these large language models. So this is really the core of where it gets its information from. The information comes from text that we have produced, and the large language model is only trained to replicate similar text if it's given a similar prompt. Yes, okay. Now, there's one concept that's also important to keep in mind, and that's the idea of a next token probability. So in the first example, we could probably agree that in 99% of all the text that we see on the internet, Paris will be the next word that follows the sentence, "What is the capital of France?" There might be some sources that are wrong, but most of the time it'll be correct. Now, if you give a prompt of Bitcoin is going ... and you look at the internet to see what happens afterwards, well, there's really a lot of disagreement about what's going to happen. So the way that I visualize what the outcome of an LLM actually is it's kind of like a wheel of fortune. So every single time that it has that it predicts what the next word is going to be, you've got this big wheel of fortune that you give a big spin, and each outcome of this wheel of fortune is one of the words that it could generate, and the word that it ends up on is the word that it gives. And then during training, what you do is you change the size of each of these outcomes on this wheel, and that changes the probability of generating a particular completion. So with Bitcoin, the opinion is really divided, and so that's why there might not be a deterministic outcome. You might have Bitcoin going to one or the other outcome. Like, for example, you could say that it goes to the moon, or it might implode, or it might succeed. But there are different outcomes that the LLM can generate because there are different outcomes that people have written about on the internet. And all the LLM does is it reflects what the probability of an outcome is that is in the training data set. So one thing that's also interesting is that it can use the context window, and it can generalize over patterns as well. So it's not just that it only memorizes, it might also memorize patterns. So for example, you might have a text that has the answer earlier on, and even though it's never seen a text before where it speaks about Amsterdam and Holland, it might still be able to use similar examples to realize that this is a capital city, this is a country, and that Holland is a synonym of the Netherlands, and that it might be able to complete Amsterdam there. So it's not just about, replicating exactly what the probabilities are of words that you've seen in the past. It can also generalize patterns to do these completions. But it's helpful to remember that the intelligence that we see really comes from such a simple task of just completing sentences based on text that you've got from the internet. The next phase in creating an LLM is steering what you want the output to actually be. And that gets done with human feedback. And this is the thing that changed GPT-2 to ChatGPT. So an LLM without any human feedback will basically regurgitate things along the same probabilities as it would have seen on the internet. Whereas you might want to create an LLM that has a particular personality, like an LLM that really likes Bitcoin. So we want to steer the LLM's behavior. And the way that the LLM's behavior is steered is that you start off by generating a lot of outputs, and then you get a human to give feedback on which outputs are good or bad. So in the Bitcoin example, if you wanted to create an LLM that really liked Bitcoin, you ask it a lot of questions about Bitcoin, you get a human to label the ones where it's positive as good, and then you train a model to replicate the feedback that the human gives. And then you, in deployment, you generate lots of text, and then based on the human feedback model, you only accept the text that you think the human is likely to give. So you basically filter the outputs that would be generated by a normal LLM to give the ones that you only want it to give. And that's what the difference was between GPT-2 and ChatGPT. And then the final bit that's currently growing in influence in creating LLMs is the in-context learning, which is basically prompting. So the prompt, as you probably all know, is how you actually get an LLM to do what you want it to do. But what's interesting is that the latest language models, they actually think out loud within their own prompt, and then can fix certain errors can spot certain errors that they make in their own thinking, and fix that before actually giving the right answer. And so that's the third way that you can steer and create an LLM that has a particular personality. It's quite interesting. You can actually see when interacting with these LLMs what the thinking actually is under the hood. And this is a little example where I was asking a mathematical question. You can really see how the language model goes systematically through different interpretations of the question. The LLM unpacks what all the notation means, and then in the end, it gives a summary of what all of its thinking is. And so what's interesting is that learning can happen all the way in the early stage of replicating the word probabilities. Learning happens at the stage of human feedback where the output gets filtered, but then learning also happens finally in this context window in the thinking out loud stage in its own context window. Okay, so there are a few questions that I would encourage you to maybe think about. So I can quickly give my perspective on these questions. So can LLMs remember facts? Well, yes, they do that by training in the early stages where they replicate the probabilities of outputting a particular word based on what's seen on the internet. Can LLMs learn how to reason? Well, that's an interesting one. So it depends on how well we've got examples of reasoning in the text that we give it, right? So if we train an LLM only on text that has examples of bad reasoning, then we'll get an LLM that reasons badly. Now, the LLMs are trained on examples of reasoning that are seen on the internet, and that contains some good examples of reasoning and some bad examples of reasoning. And the LLM is going to reflect that. So to answer the question, can LLMs learn how to reason better than humans? I think that the current way that LLMs are being trained are only going to replicate the capabilities that we have and won't necessarily surpass it. It might surpass a human in terms of the ability to remember facts, but that's only because it can read more than a human. But it only ever has access to examples of reasoning that humans have already created. So that leads to an ingredient of these of AI that LLMs currently don't use to train, but which is absolutely necessary to get superhuman performance. And that's reinforcement learning. So what I described earlier was called supervised learning, which basically follows a model where us as humans create data that the LLM replicates, but it has this garbage in, garbage out behavior. Whereas reinforcement learning is a learning style where an artificial intelligence takes actions in the world and then gets feedback about whether something goes well or goes badly in the world, and then automatically figures out how to change its actions so that it gets a better outcome in the future. And because you've got high quality feedback of whether something is going well or not, you can actually keep improving even beyond the level that a human can do. So reinforcement learning is basically at the core of these game-playing AIs like AlphaGo, which beat the best human at Go in the past. And the way that it learned is by playing lots of games against itself. And even as it surpassed the level of human capability, it was still getting the feedback on how to improve by determining whether it was winning or losing a game, and it could still improve itself. And that's how it continued to improve over superhuman performance. And LLMs, because they're currently only trained on the internet, I doubt, well, I think they're going to need something like reinforcement learning to see that superhuman performance. So yeah, what I think is funny is that in the movie War Games, this example of playing against itself was already speculated about back in the 80s. So this is where everything's going wrong. But here a game is playing tic-tac-toe against each other, hundreds of times a second. And that's the only way that it can actually learn something new, basically. And I think that's a pretty realistic depiction of how AlphaGo is trained. So getting automatic feedback is key to make reinforcement learning work. Now, that's easy for games and, interestingly, mathematics. So I think mathematics is the next thing that computers are going to become superhuman at. But I think it's going to be hard for many agentic tasks because lots of data is needed. And how many examples often in agentic tasks, every task is slightly different, and that's what makes it difficult. And so it's hard to get millions of examples of the same thing over and over again, which is what you currently need to train these large models. So I think there's a bit of a question there about whether this is actually going to, how we can make this work. But I definitely believe that reinforcement learning is going to be key to successful agentic AI, and we're going to have to solve this data hunger problem somehow. Okay, so can we predict advances in AI? I think there are three possible scenarios. So there's snap, crackle, and pop. And I just wanted to present the evidence that the pop scenario is based on. So you might have heard the term scaling laws, but this is basically the reasoning behind these billions of investment summarized in one plot. So on the x-axis here, you basically have something that measures how much you spend on computation. And on the y-axis is some kind of measure of how good the LLM is. And the one observation that is pushing these billions of investment is the fact that if you increase the compute by a factor of 10 or 100, then you get a predictable improvement in performance of your large language model. And what people saw in the early days of these language models is that they saw that it kept getting better. And what they did is they drew a line through these improvements, and then they saw that this line continued to hold every single time they added more computation. So that's evidence that if you do the same thing, and if you just throw more money at the problem, then you're going to get better performance. And this is it. This is basically the entire justification for the billions of dollars of investment into these technologies. So the three scenarios: snap, crackle, and pop. So snap, people, there are some people like Gary Marcus that's saying that deep learning is hitting the wall, and that the technology is going to be a failure in the sense that these capabilities are a mirage. It might look really good, but when you actually deploy it, it'll start making too many mistakes to ever be useful. I think that Gary Marcus has gone down this route a little bit too far and now can't really walk back from it. And I could have also made a slide with all the incorrect predictions that Gary Marcus has made about the failures of AI over the years. The pop scenario, sort of that's the scary scenario I was talking about earlier. Well, scary, just hard to imagine, of AGI by 2026, 2027. And here I've got a quote by Dario Amodei where he's actually saying this. And it's basically based on this scaling plot that I showed earlier. That scaling will continue as it has been. No new techniques are needed. We just need investment and computers. 2026 is a pretty close deadline. It's 3 months, 3 to 15 months away. And then what I think is the most likely scenario is that things might crackle, but that might create a bit of a turbulent time in the next few years if this happens as well. So why I think that crackle is the most likely scenario is because I think that AI is already useful even if progress stops today. You can already build useful technologies using LLMs. You can already get them to autonomously do certain things, maybe in limited scenarios that are very well defined, when your prompt is perfect and all that kind of stuff, but it's already useful. But even with this observation that it's already useful, there are fears of an AI bubble. And even 3 days ago, this was reported on the BBC. People in Silicon Valley have been talking about this for a little longer. But the worry is that tech will not see, the reason why people are worried about a bubble is because the big tech companies that have developed these methods might not see a profit soon enough. And one of the reasons is that running these models is incredibly energy intensive, and it currently costs way more to actually give people the answers that they're asking for with these language models. It costs a lot more to give those answers than they get in subscription revenue. So they're actually, all these big tech companies are making a loss on their AI products at the moment. And it could be that the current pricing schemes are way too low, and that they're going to have to ramp up the prices, and that's going to drastically narrow the reach of these technologies. But I think that the market will find its niche where it can be applied. But it could mean that some of these big tech companies might go bust, and that these big tech companies are not going to be the ones that are actually going to capture the value of this AI, right? Another scenario in which this can happen is if progress stalls a bit and these open source models kind of catch up, and that just means that the people running the AIs can be much smaller players than these big tech companies, which means that a revenue stream that the open AIs and the Anthropics wanted to capture will actually be captured by people who host these language models. It's a possibility. So that might be very worrying for OpenAI and Anthropic, but it's not worrying for people that actually want to use these technologies to do something useful. So I'm a little bit cynical about these pop scenarios. Researchers who I really respect and who've been in the field for a long time, they join OpenAI and suddenly they start posting on Twitter all the time about how ChatGPT is superhuman at certain things. So this is an example of a tweet of a claim that GPT-5 Pro is superhuman at literature search. I would love it if GPT was this good at literature search. It sometimes is brilliant, but most of the time it really isn't. But I think that these big tech companies have a financial incentive to give this impression that the progress is sustained and that these methods are already superhuman, and that the next big thing is around the corner because they need those billions of funding to continue running. Okay, so finally, I just want to give a few words on how to deploy agentic AI. So just to give an example of what off-the-shelf agentic AI looks like now. So OpenAI has already released a tool called Operator that allows you to let one of these foundation models take over your computer and act on your behalf. And this is a great little YouTube video that gives an unbiased view, literally a recording of what happens when you ask it to do certain simple tasks. Like, for example, book a hotel in New York City from February 4th to February 12th. And what it does is it opens up a browser window inside your browser. It might go to booking.com, it clicks on the link, then it knows how to click on the departure and or the arrival and departure dates. It sets the departure dates, looks at certain options, and then actually books something on your behalf, which is super impressive, right? If you imagine what these models have to do in order to do this, they need to be able to see the website, they need to be able to interpret what the text is doing, they need to understand your prompts to figure out what it actually has to do. But it booked it for the wrong date. So, I guess what I'm saying is that it's super impressive technology, but you can't expect agentic AI to work out of the box. I think it's quite a challenge to actually create something, and it takes skill and monitoring and evaluation and a whole framework around it to actually make things work well. And I think in the Crackle scenario, this is likely to be with us for a while. The fact that building agentic AI is going to be a skill and it's going to be hard and it's going to be costly, and you might want to build one agent that you can then scale across multiple different businesses rather than individuals just creating their agents themselves. A short note on risks. I think the biggest risk of agentic AI is that it allows you to make mistakes at scale, right? So if you've got one agent that handles all your customer services, and a few weeks in, you realize that it's consistently been promising something that you can't deliver on, how do you fix this? Or if your agent has done administration incorrectly, and you've got 10,000 details of 10,000 customers that have been messed up. If you've hired a whole bunch of AI agents that do this for you, but only one human that is in charge of this, then in these rare events of catastrophic mistakes, you simply won't have the human capacity that's adaptable to actually fix this. I think that's a big risk. Agents basically reduce the cost of common tasks, but increase the cost of an infrequent mistake. And I think this is super difficult to deal with as a business, right? Because what will happen to businesses if everybody uses agentic AI all the time? Well, we have businesses that are super profitable when they're running as usual until they make a big mistake and find themselves financially liable to way more than they ever earned, and then they just go bust. We can't run a society like that, because that basically means that it's not going to work. So there's a big question about who takes responsibility for the failure. Is it the AI provider? Is it the business that uses it? I think it should be the business that uses it. I think that's the only way that we can spread the responsibility out to a manageable level, because otherwise the single AI provider might, be assuming the risk of every single business it serves, which might be, half the planet if you believe these, if you believe the CEOs of OpenAI and Anthropic. So I think one of, if a lot of stuff gets automated, I actually think that one of the key roles of a business will be to assume the risk and responsibility of delivering a good service to the people that use it. Currently we use insurance to protect against rare and highly impactful mistakes. Will we have insurance against AI mistakes in the future? I don't know, maybe. But nevertheless, regardless of who is financially liable, we might still ask the question, are we creating a more and more efficient, but also ever more brittle economy? And you already see that with automation now, right? Where the NHS completely shuts down when Google Cloud is down. You didn't have that 10 years ago when every hospital had its own data storage solution. Then, each hospital might go down, a little bit more often. But if one hospital goes down, people can get diverted somewhere else. Whereas if all hospitals go down, we really have a big problem. So I worry about the brittleness of the economy if we all start relying on centralized sources of automation. So to conclude, I think that we don't control, or we can't really know the pace of AI. But I think the one sentence summary is that we don't know when it will happen, but it will happen. I think in certain areas we can be quite sure that AI is going to be superhuman, like mathematics, interestingly, which is classically considered hard, but I think that will be easy for AIs to develop because it's like a game, it can get perfect feedback. Whereas for certain tasks, business tasks, it might be a little bit harder for it to be completely automated and fully superhuman. So that leads you to the question of, well, when should you use AI yourself? Well, the trick is basically to jump on the train at the right moment, right? So AI is continuously developing its capabilities, and it's constantly getting better, but we can't predict when it's going to get better. So the real trick is going to be realizing when it's suddenly good enough to do certain things that you want to do, and then jumping on the train and using it. Not before, because then you might make a lot of mistakes, and which is a bad thing, and not after, because then you're too late. So the only way that I think that you can jump on the train at the right moment is if you're running alongside the train at the same time. So you have to be prototyping AI solutions, trying things out, and continuously monitoring and evaluating possible solutions, so that when suddenly the performance is good enough to be deployed, and then you jump on the train. But that still leaves the risk when you do deploy it. What do you do when things go wrong? So thanks very much for your attention. I look forward to the panels, and happy to chat during the breaks later on as well.
Just a couple of points there. People were here last year when we had Professor Michael
Waldrich.
Yes. One of the things he mentioned was data, and the fact that all these LLMs are trained on public data, and actually they run out of data. People load up more pictures of cats and stuff every year, but generally it's run out of data. But the one bit of data that does exist that's absolutely ginormous is corporate data, and it sits behind a wall right now for the right reasons. And the big guys can't get at that. You guys can. And so it's how you use that data, to Mark's point. And I just wanted to pick up a couple of bits because I loved what you said there. If you look at agentic AI now, it should always have a human in the loop. 100% should have it, to Mark's point, because if you don't have that there, then you are opening up a massive, massive risk. There are some very basic tasks that you can do, and you can know it will do it 100% of the time correct. But when you're looking at your business processes, you really do need to look at how you have a human in the loop and where that human is in that process. And then one other bit I'd say is this is a business decision. It's the one thing I repeat over and over again when I meet people. It is not a technology decision. If you're looking at agentic AI and looking at it as a technology and looking at your IT department to put this into your business, it's going to fail. A recent survey, a piece of research was done only a couple of weeks ago, 94% of all agentic AI is failing now. And the reasons, the main drivers for that is that the actual task that they're looking at has not been mapped out properly. They haven't got humans in the loop. It's basically been implemented incorrectly. So like any technology, especially computer technology, if you don't do it right, you're just going to get rubbish coming out the other end. So this technology is capable of doing incredible things, but to Mark's point, it's limited in what it can do right now. And that's why I'm going to do a little push about us. That's why we believe about AI being by the side of a human and not replacing a human, because we're not there yet. Maybe we will in 5+ years. I don't know. I'm sure we'll get better and better and better. That's a given, I think. But anyway, thank you very much, Mark. It was a brilliant talk. We're going to have a quick break now, and then we're going to get on to the first panel. It is going to be quick, so just grab a cup of tea and we'll keep it to 5 minutes. It was going to be 10, it's now 5. Thanks.
Great. I'm on the panel.
All right, great.
That's really interesting. I learned a lot more about AI in that one session than I have previously. That's so much really cool.
Yeah. Oh, so that's what I'm here for.
What you say, I did maths at university, and it's funny what you say about maths, because it's the right one works, right?
Yeah.
But I always love to know maths, right or wrong.
And you can get computers to actually automatically verify whether something's right or wrong.
Just that bit of it's fascinating. I think when we read it, we were having young kids. We were talking about what would you tell your kids to do. So if you question, someone said, what would you tell your kids to go study now? And I'm 4 and 7. What would you tell them to do? And we were all saying creative or get a trade. You know, it's already really hard to get a plumber. So that's what we were kind of saying. Sorry, I don't want to help you.
Hi.
Go and chat.
I was an AI researcher back in the day.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm intrigued with unsupervised learning you see AI using evolutionary computing to create neural networks. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But I'm still listening.
That seems the biggest opportunity to me.
So I think we should take I didn't respond in email because there's too much to say.
Yeah, I've got all these designs here.
Nice. So there's one thing. Obviously,
Right, okay. Okay, right. Louder. We're going to start now. 5 minutes in, I've been 10 minutes. So the first panel, so everybody that is on the panel, first panel, please take a seat. So we're going to discuss here what people's views are on the impact in the legal and financial sectors in Jersey, but to be totally honest, it's more of a general point around the legal and financial sectors. They are two of the biggest areas of focus for agentic AI at the moment globally. Especially legal is getting a lot of focus and a lot of money going behind it to multiply, whether that will pop, crackle, or whatever. So Mark's going to facilitate the panels, and I'll hand over to Mark.
All right, so yeah, Great to be here. Can everybody else maybe just introduce themselves briefly and say your name and what you're interested in? And
Yeah, everyone obviously would have seen me up at the beginning there. I'm James. I'm one of the co-founders of Clairo. Julian and I obviously started together 2 years ago now, pretty much, almost 2 years ago. Yeah, so that's where I fit in.
So I'm Seb Lawson. I'm the head of innovation at Digital Jersey. We are the island's sort of change transformation agency for government. So looking at kind of where are we going with AI? What are we looking at over the next few years? Where do we need to maybe get involved and help the industry adopt it properly?
Thank you. I'm Dean. I'm the Director of Strategic Alliances at Keynote Compute, one of the sponsors of today's event. Hello.
Hi, I'm Paul Coleshill. I am the CEO of BCR Group, which is BCR Law, BCR Professional Services, and Executors, Delegates, and Attorneys.
Great, thanks very much. So I'll take my opinions out of it unless you specifically ask me something, so I give you an opportunity to speak. The first question that we wanted to discuss was, how do you see agentic AI changing the everyday work of lawyers along with legal and finance teams? So if you've got an opinion, please.
I'll go first. Thanks.
We'll be asking for questions from the audience later on.
No, I'm on the.
You're on the panel. Oh gosh. That's terrible. So that means we need another seat. Oh yeah, take a seat. Please introduce yourself.
Introduce yourself.
Absolutely, that's why this is me. Hello. Apologies for being late. I'm Andrew Evans, so I'm the head of innovation at JFC.
So you heard the question.
I did not hear the question.
Okay, well, the question was, how do you see agentic AI changing the everyday work of lawyers along with legal and finance teams? So, yeah.
I think it's a really interesting question because the press and everyone is very keen to sort of say that AI will be replacing everybody's jobs. I think what will actually happen is that it will create different skill sets within people's jobs now. There is no doubt that we will always have to have human interaction with any AI output, from a legal standpoint, but also from a client standpoint. I think we're very much concentrated sometimes on what legally we should be doing, and it just can create all these efficiencies. But at the end of the day, we have to give advice to clients. The new sources of AI will make efficiencies in some of the processes that we do, especially client take on. But we do also have to temper that with the fact that how good are they? Will they be able to look at the sniff test when you take a client on? Who will look at SARS? Who will look at the general compliance of the codes? So though the everyday workload will change, because a lot of the more junior, and as we like to call it, grunt work, will be done by AI. The checking of that work will be done by humans, and my biggest challenge is that how do you upskill those humans in the future? Because to recognize, and the only way to do that is through years of experience without AI, to understand whether AI is lying or not, and that's the challenge. I'll move on.
Yeah, just to complement that, I think if done right, Agentics AI is really a force multiplier. So what we're doing, the long-term vision of this, and it is mid to long-term vision. We take the people, these paralegals, the people doing the real paper process, admin-intensive parts of the job, and we repurpose them from being execution to governance. If we can figure out what that upskill process looks like, and I think that's really exciting. That's really exciting because we effectively create a brand new value chain within the business. We can take on new customers without sacrificing quality of service to existing clientele. And I think that's what we're all shooting for here. So that's my take. It's a good point.
So I think when you look at the sort of shift it's going to have in the workplace, the primary thing is going to be the echoing similar sentiment, really. The sort of skill set's going to have to shift dramatically. We're moving to more some of the softer skills, some of the human interaction skills. Account management and stuff like that will still be done on a human level. People buy from people. They always have done. They always will do. And so it's really looking at what are the skills that people need to shift outside of necessarily selling, because not everyone's going to be great at selling. Strategic thinking, oversight, how to manage a suite of agents, for example. Those are all going to become really important skill sets, I think.
I had a realization a few weeks ago, actually a couple of months ago, about 3 big new career paths that are going to start in businesses, or roles that every business is going to have. It kind of echoes, one of the 3 echo what you're talking about is I think everyone's very aware of prompt engineers. That's kind of a common term everyone's talked about. That's usually the creative people that can get these models to do some really interesting stuff. The other 2 are less commonly known. One that I would call a context architect, which, and in this sense, I mean, it's someone that actually has so much domain expertise in a business, they know where all the data sits within the business and how agents can access that, because that is a critical part of being successful in agentic AI. So you need to know where context lives in order to use it to do all these amazing things that AI promises. The third one, which I think is more aligned to what we're talking about here, is evaluators. And these are generally people that have extremely good attention to detail, which could be like junior paralegals, or whatever roles are filled up in legal and finance from a junior level. And their job is going to be to actually validate that AI is doing successful outcomes. And I think if you look at a task which might take 10 hours and you automate it and does it in 10 minutes, that's awesome, but you're still going to need that extra hour at the end of that 10 minutes to go over and evaluate the outputs, because you're always going to have the human in the loop. So I think that's where one of these career paths, which just to echo what these guys are saying, is going to be a new space in legal and finance, and actually most industries, I'd say.
I was just also going to point out that it's actually going to make lawyers better. Because of no, because they have to upskill. But it will make lawyers better, because what they will do is, now using AI, there's less fatigue. Your junior lawyers don't have that fatigue, especially when they're doing large amounts of discovery and things. And that is a really big issue. And it also allows a firm that's smaller to punch above its weight, because instead of now, you could only have a large case which may be suited to certain lawyers, certain litigators, but needs lots and lots of discovery. Now, smaller firms can pitch for this work by using AI to do a lot of that discovery work. And so you'll see specialisms, I would imagine, in the law, in the legal sector, which is something it's happening anyway at the moment. So the more boutique firms will be able to handle much larger matters.
Sounds good. And I think that in a way is suitable for what the future of the industry brings. So if, for example, you have a lawyer that's helping in M&A cases or digital assets, that will enable them to operate in those areas more effectively and hopefully lower the barriers to entry. Looking from a finance point of view, in a way, a lot of people are trying to predetermine where AI is going to hit and how they're going to adjust. But fundamentally, I really love your analogy, Mark, of running next to the train, right? You don't really know when to jump, but I think you should run around it. So upskill, try to do some pilots and see where it can be best deployed. In our organization recently, we opened a general AI, so Copilot chat, really, to help with general productivity. And 3 months later, we've done a survey to ask people how they feel about it, rather than exactly how it impacted. And we obviously, we're at some point, we're going to be public with those results, but some of them were astounding in terms of some people say, look, it reduced my anxiety, it reduced my stress, I'm more confident to respond to certain emails, which was very, very interesting. And most people use it every day, and that's a very general use of AI, it's not specific. We're running a few pilots for some of our core processes as well, and we're seeing that it can help a lot. It doesn't take you from A to Z, but it helps you along the journey, and maybe it reduces your time to accomplish it by, let's say, 50%. Obviously, the specialist there, you need to understand what's good, what's not good, but it really, really helps. In terms of upskilling, I don't know, but what I do know is that in different places where this industry, let's say, fragmentation has happened, or this ferment has happened, people moved on in a very, very good way. So, for example, when spreadsheets appeared, for example, in auditing, people say, oh, I need my calculator, I need to print this, I need to add them up manually. And how will you learn how to do additions if you have this computer that does it for you. And obviously that's a super new point. So there will be new skills that are available, similar to how today you're not going to learn how to be a blacksmith, right? You're going to have other types of skills. There's still a niche need for that, but by and large, you don't. So I think the best way to actually go forward is to embrace it as much as you can. Obviously be sensible, put some reasonable controls around it, but just go for it.
If I can maybe press on this question about how it changes everyday work. So I heard that the nature of the work is going to change. It might be more strategic rather than, so someone said, focusing on governance rather than execution. I also heard, new technical requirements like becoming a context engineer, which is all about figuring out how domain expertise needs to be translated into something that the LLM understands, which requires a technical skill set. But to maybe press on this question about jobs disappearing a bit more, I remember, some of my peers at university who went into law were very excited about getting their first training contract. And some of them are partners at law firms now, so they've really gone through that whole trajectory. But it does seem like maybe the trainee work is the work that is going to, maybe change most or maybe shrink. So what does that mean for this talent pipeline from trainee to partner? Because, you will need to educate people in the law, humans, for the foreseeable future. And, from what I heard about what it's like to be a trainee, it's very much, you do your stuff, you make your mistakes, and the partner tells you, how to do things next time. So yeah, any thoughts on this?
Go. Right. So let me start a little bit with the macro view. Right. The World Economic Forum back in January or February launched a report on risks. Right, and this was about the risk of AI, and mentioned that look, AI is likely over the next decade to create something like 170 million new jobs, but at the same time, it's very likely to displace 90 million jobs. So there's a net positive of 80 million there. But where things got a little bit hazy is the quality of those jobs, because most of the jobs that they were going to create were actually quite, let's say, gig economy type of jobs. There were a few very high paying, like your data scientists and people that train the model, but those are quite limited. Most of them would be quite, let's say, unsafe jobs, where the ones that they're going for specifically were those, middle type of jobs that are secure, that have benefits, that have a career path. And obviously, the way to get into those jobs is by being a, let's say, trainee or starting from a junior level and working yourself up. So that's going to impact quite heavily. If you look more closely to home, the Jersey Fiscal Policy Panel said that the average projection for Jersey for 26-29 is that the growth rate in real terms will average at around 1%, which is extraordinarily low, right? If you look at historical averages. So if you look at the macroeconomic projections, it doesn't look great from that point of view. So the question is, okay, what do we do now? Because they're looking at some numbers and they're projecting the future, but we are also making the future every day, and we're reinventing industries and businesses, right? If you're looking at AI, if you're looking at digital assets, if you look at what's happening in what's generally called the fourth industrial revolution, where you have drones, driverless cars, we've seen a few, and so on and so forth, we're creating new things. How? We need to find how, right? I like one of your hints that, look, we have the big companies that will accaparate a lot of the market, but also maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe you'll have a lot of fragmentation, right? So we'll have to rethink training, we'll have to rethink education, where does this go to? We'll have to rethink work, because we still need people, quite a lot of them, and maybe more skilled than today. And we'll find new pathways. It doesn't mean we've solved the issue. That's why we're asking the question, but we have to grapple with the question as applied to our individual context. Right. I hope that makes sense.
I think our lawyers will still learn. I really do, because there's risk. And where there's risk, there has to be knowledge. So what may happen is that some of the more junior work, some of the more onboarding work might change, but the actual work of analysing the outputs, actually understanding the laws, will actually mean that those that are having to do it will have to have their A game on all the time. Because before there was a book, there was a precedent. Now there is someone giving you an output. Now you have to know whether that output is right, whether that output is wrong. And so the cream will of course rise to the top. But that doesn't, and I actually think all the law firms struggle at the moment with looking at succession. What is our succession plan? What is, are we going to be going through more partners in the future? Are we going to contract? What is going to happen? But the one thing that's clear is that all of them are identifying people within their organization and upskilling those people. And it's the bright ones that will always come through. So I think it's just a case of if you want to be a lawyer and you're in a good firm, they will train you because you can't make mistakes, because the client won't allow you to make mistakes. And so it's in big companies and huge organizations, I can see that there will be challenges. But in small, medium-sized law firms, AI will help us. It will make some efficiencies. It will do some template work for us. It will make sure our data integrity is there, but it will never take away the ability for us to train the next generation of lawyers. Because, people have made mistakes. There was that case in New York where they used ChatGPT and it made up 5 fictitious cases to refer to. The reputational damage to the law firm is massive if you just basically just let it go free. You can't allow that to happen. So that's always at the forefront of our decision making and making sure we get the right people to do the right job.
Yeah, I think it's one of the topics that I find, I guess, most worrying in some regards, because I think those junior roles are ones that people haven't necessarily thought about the displacement and how do we actually give people a sort of early career path. But at the same time, I think, to your point, I think if you, as an organization, if you leverage the fact that the AI tools that are out there are going to take away the mundane work from your juniors, you can actually then give them more client-facing opportunity, more experience, and they can accelerate that part of the job faster because they're not spending the time doing the boring bits of the research and everything else. They can get a bot to do that. They can get an agent to do that. So I think it depends on the organization entirely. Is my view.
So I think just listening to some of these comments, there is a fundamental difference between an AI agent and agentic AI. So we can be relatively hands-off with an AI agent. There's an input, there's a decision-making framework, and then there's an output. With agentic AI, I think if we start to look at these things as a digital employee, we put more emphasis on extreme ownership to the firm, right? And I think one of the big value adds is if we're able to get that junior to a decision-making process sooner, we're upskilling them faster. So if we take away the monotony of the paper process and remove the red tape, we're actually training these guys a lot sooner. There's a faster time to return on investment when it comes to hiring new starters, right? Yeah.
Also, to one of the points that was made earlier, lawyers, particularly in those early days, as far as I'm aware with my friends, they, most of the time is spent sleeping under a desk and working all hours that they'll give. So I think if you can take away some of that, they're going to work more efficiently at actually picking up some of the other skills when they're in the normal working hours.
Nothing major to add to this, but I read a stat a couple of days ago that like 80% of a junior's job is the mundane, boring, sit in a file room and find data, and 20% is what they actually went to law school to do. Something like that. Might have got the numbers slightly different, but a big proportion of the time is spent sitting in a data room. But that doesn't change the fact that you still need the context of what the data is. You can't just say to an agent, here's 2 terabytes of information for this e-discovery. What is the answer? We have to be able to build agents which can also feed context to paint the story of what it is, because out of that 2 terabytes of data, whatever it is, a large portion of it is going to need to be put into a chronological order to provide the right context. And I think the junior's role is going to be building these agents or these nodes in a way that can paint these stories correctly because they have context of a legal case and how the process likes to be followed. And that will be how they learn about the use cases in legal.
Just want to build on that a little bit. So, for example, if you look at the legal profession and especially the precedent case that you've discussed where the precedent was fabricated or hallucinated, obviously submitting that to the court is a big no-no. If you know about that, that may be a contempt of court, you can go into a lot of legal trouble for it. So obviously not a great thing to do. That is how things are today. However, we should think a little bit about the future, right? We'll think about AI and what AI might be. And what I may want to ask is, let's look at that precedent that was submitted, even if it was made up. Was the crux of the argument valid? Should we reject, the thrust of the argument just because that didn't happen in precedent, right? So I know that's kind of like a nuclear bomb to drop in this context, but if you think about it, that makes sense. Would that case be won based on that the merits of that argument, even if it didn't happen in the past, but was substantial? So things like that, maybe in let's say domains that are a little bit more not so regimented, are the type of question that we need to ask ourselves, grapple with, and come up with an answer. I don't know what the answer is. I know what the answer is today, today's reality, but we need to think about the future, because yes, we are at a certain age, and most of us have kids, and we have to think about what type of world we're creating for them, because the reality is shifting quite fast.
So I had two more questions that I'd like to fit into the remaining time that we have, which is slowly come to a close. So maybe some quick fire answers. So one question, so we've covered actually a lot of ground already, but one thing that I also mentioned in my talk, which I'm curious to hear your opinion about, is if an AI system makes a financial or a legal error, who should be held accountable? So yeah.
Well, it's the firm. It can't be the provider unless the provider has said it's closed. It's a closed amount of data. You can only use our data, and they then produce something, or they then allow it to look at other data which is outside of the engagement. But no, it has to be the firm, and you won't be able to get insurance for this sort of stuff. Cyber insurance is ridiculous. Imagine AI insurance. It will be astronomical. So yeah, I think it's that's it. The blame has to stop with the person that's signing it off.
One other little bit of context maybe to add there is sometimes I wonder how the AI Act, the EU AI Act, is going to interplay with this. And the EU AI Act has an interesting requirement about giving interpretability in certain decisions. And so my opinion is that the buck should stop at the final company offering the service, so the firm itself. But this interpretability question is something that the creator of the AI has to incorporate. And so I've always wondered, that seems to be like a mechanism by which blame can be passed on to the creator of the AI. And I don't know.
So I've got a few thoughts on this. So one of the comments made earlier is jobs are disappearing. I kind of disagree with that statement. I think the jobs very much exist in the truest form of themselves. What we've done, or what we're trying to do, is bring in these digital employees to be autonomous and to make decisions for us, to speed up the process, right? And I think anytime we hire someone into the business, anytime I make a hiring decision or I build a team, the buck stops with me. I have to employ people who have an engineering background or a sales background or a marketing background or whatever. The due diligence is on me. And I think the same applies to a business incorporating agentic AI. That's there to do a job, a very specific job, right? And I think if you haven't done your due diligence, the buck stops with you. However, on the flip side of that, there is absolutely ownership on the developer to kind of provide immutable auditability, right? Because if we can't lift the hood and see what's going on, then we're all kind of buggered. And I think it's so important to have those two in harmony. That's my take.
I think it's a really interesting topic, and it's one that's definitely it's becoming quite topical around the world with more people adopting it. I do agree. I think it fundamentally stops. The buck stops with the company that's used the tools. They still should have the right processes, the right human in the loop interactions. But if you look at some of the previous cases, I mean, you take one of the recent big ones that came about, which was the post office with, I think it was Fujitsu, where the technology behind the post office, that was actually they are still trying to work out whether they can get more out of Fujitsu, and it's actually ended up falling on the government, of course. But I don't think it's going to be a simple one size fits all answer. I think it's going to depend a lot. If you look at the when they first did all the image generation tools that came out a few 2-3 years ago, a lot of the large hyperscalers were actually basically saying, don't worry about copyright issues, you can blame us if there's any problem and we'll sort it out. Like, they were just accepting the fact that they might have some kickback. So I don't think you know the answer fully, but I do fundamentally agree at the moment it should sit with the company that's deployed the tech.
I just think from like an AI provider perspective, you have to also ensure the people you're working with that you do have validation metrics and monitoring in place, so that when things do go wrong, you can surface that quite quickly and have very good audit trails back to why it went wrong. So you can iterate on the model or the agent to have higher accuracy next time. So as long as those procedures are in place and there's still human in the loop to pick up on a lot of these issues before they get out, you'll have a good enough feedback loop to make it better over time, essentially.
I was going to say it's quite interesting where Jersey's going to be on this, because you've got the EU Act, and then you've got a more principles-based approach coming into the UK, which I'm as an accountant, I'm quite familiar with that, whereby I think it's moving too fast to pin regulation on something at the moment. I think it needs to have a period of stability and for people to understand how it's being used in the marketplace in different industries. And I think only then you'll only then have the ability to actually put some regulation behind some of these things. Because of course, the problem with AI and in the past, you've got data sets that could be based upon gender bias. It can have all of this sort of thing. And we've got to ensure that we don't have that. We've got to ensure that if we're using AI in our firm, it will have a AI tick on it to say, this is being generated by AI, therefore it needs an extra process in this, so we can make sure that this is right. I don't know, maybe that will be part of the regulations that come in, that you have to, like IFAs have to say about, their percentage commissions. We have to say what percentage of the work is being carried out by AI.
We saw a similar story, or with Mark's demo earlier of the self-driving cars. It's a similar story in that there's been different tiers of autonomous vehicles for quite a while. Tier 5 obviously being the fully autonomous, it can pretty much go out on its own. But tier 1, 2, 3, and potentially 4 has been around for quite a while. And it's kind of paused there, not full autonomy, so regulation could catch up so that we can know where the points of failure are. And I think the same thing will be with agents, is we will have not fully autonomous agents for quite a while. One is because the models, I think, still have quite a way to go in terms of their reasoning and costs, and definitely on cost as well. But also we do need time for people to become accustomed to this technology and also trust it. Yep.
Maybe building on a little bit, so obviously answering your precise question, if you produce an output as a company, you're responsible for that output. If any of you are regulated, you understand that if you have a supervisor visit and you get a question along the lines of why have you on board this client, saying the AI told us to do so is not really a great way to present yourself. So that's how things are today. It's similar, that's what happens with any technology, right? If you write an email that's not very clear, or let's say you have some bad things there, it's not Outlook's fault or Safari's fault because you write it, it's your fault, right? If you write a bad report, it's not Microsoft's Word fault, it's your fault in a way. So you're responsible for the output, even if you got assistance, or it's not Wikipedia's fault, or Encyclopedia Britannica's fault that you've created something that's not great. So that's how things are today. But in the future, I think things will be actually much more complex than you might anticipate, right? Because you have the producer of the AI, which may have some liability in certain cases, like the copyright ones. For example, if I'm creating something and that's copyrighted and that's generated directly by an AI tool or service that I use, I may go against the producer. It might be the implementer's fault. So let's say I'm embedding AI in some sort of an onboarding process. Part of that workflow has sanction screening, and the implementer, so nothing to do with AI, but the implementer, has some downtime in terms of checking the latest sanctions and some sanction individual got in, and we've onboarded the client, and that creates some risk. That's an implementer's problem, right? Obviously, it will be how people use and interpret the outputs of AI. The outputs may be okay, but the interpretation or the application may be bad. So actually, you have to segment in quite granular detail to see where the liability lies in case there's a problem. I suspect that most of those problems will be worked out in due course, but it's not going to be as easy.
So I had one more question that I'm also personally very interested in hearing the answer to, and that's hooking into the stat that you said earlier about that 80% of the work is sifting through information for junior lawyers, basically, right? I would be really interested to hear what the wish list is for fixes of the current technology that would actually make it much more useful. Yeah.
Got a big list on that, but I'll keep it short for today. I think context retrieval, context engineering is probably the most challenging problem we have in AI at the moment. The models are good, and as a business or as a small AI business, you're never going to make models insanely better without spending a ton on compute and fine tuning, which is sometimes a process to go down, but requires deep expertise in data science and compute configurations. But I think from a technology point, the models are really good at reasoning. It's pretty amazing what they can do now. The problem is getting at the right data at the right time to make those decisions. And that's a whole field that's emerged called context engineering. And on a small business where you have maybe a little bit of data in OneDrive and 3 or 4 SaaS systems, it's pretty easy to find context. If you want to get an agent to book you a flight, you can probably find that because it's got to go to one system. But if you look at businesses that have been around for decades that have petabytes of data, hundreds of systems, sometimes thousands of databases, and you're asking it to find information within that big ocean of information, that's where AI is struggling. And it's not actually the model that's struggling there, it's the engineering techniques around the model. So the field of context engineering is still very, very immature, I'd say. I think there's some really interesting technologies out there, but it's ripe for disruption. And I've seen quite a few things recently, which gives me confidence that we will find solutions for context engineering. And I think that's where the game is right now in AI.
I think I've saw a diagram, or I've seen it a few times actually over the last couple of years, where they, new LLM models are being released on a sort of cyclical basis. It'll go, Google, then OpenAI, then DeepSeek, and so on. It just goes through the cycle across all of them. I think actually trying to let the sort of market catch up a little bit and actually help the market adopt better would be more useful, I think, for most people at the moment, mainly because, to James's point, I don't think necessarily the people who've built the technology and designed it from scratch necessarily understand some of the flaws with implementing it. So spending more time around, doing customer discovery, doing product discovery, and actually looking at what's useful and what's not.
I don't have a huge amount to add to this. I really like the concept of context engineering. So we're taking that back with me. Very good. I think one of the big challenges with adopting AI agentic AI in enterprise is that a lot of the people you're talking to are kind of entrenched in quite rudimental ways of doing business. And that's cool, it's a fun way to do business, right? But the industry is moving faster than they can catch up. And one of the points that we made earlier was, what do we do? Do we wait for legislation, et cetera, et cetera? We're always going to innovate faster than legislation can catch up. That's always going to be the nature of the game that we play. So we need to take a very ethical and intentional position on how we deploy agentic AI. So I think that's really important. But to come back to the point, I think it comes back to education. I think teaching people how to adopt agentic AI in an ethical way, so they're not scared about the cannibalization of jobs and all this stuff, and how it can be a real enabler and a force multiplier of what they do is how I approach it.
I think from a technical perspective, I don't really have a lot. But
I actually meant, what is a wish list of things that it can do that it currently doesn't? So I don't need any technical perspective.
Well, I suppose the biggest wish list would be to get staff off social media sometimes. Can I do that? Actually, we don't have that problem. We're quite lucky. Maybe my kids. But I think the big wish list for me is data integrity, because if I'm using just my data, which is the plan, I want to ensure that all my data, before I run next to this train, with the analogy, I want to make sure my data's all right, and that's the process I'm going through at the moment. It's that, we're 9 years old, 10 years next year, and we're looking through all our historical data and going, okay, what have we got here? Do we have old drafts of documents that we don't need? Do we have that? We want it to build on the really good stuff and not some of the, not the 20 drafts that were done before you actually got the full document. And that means that my thing would be, if it can tell me about my data integrity and what I should get rid of and what I should keep, then I can build on really firm foundations.
That makes sense. I already have one. Thank you. Not too much to add to that, except for I would like to be a little bit more transparent. So, for example, let's say I give it 20 documents and it fails to read one, or it fails to read some parts of that one, or it doesn't understand something. I would like to tell me, look, I don't understand this part. So, or when I created those outputs, I made a lot of assumptions here, there, and there. So I can check that rather than assume it got all the data in. Also, sometimes, this is quite silly, but sometimes, let's say you put a Word document in and it reads it and summarizes it for you. And then you give it the PDF and it says, oh, I can't do that. And I'm like, but it's not just a Word that's in PDF. I know it's a basic example, but sometimes just tell me. Or if you give them a lot of documents, it will read a 20, but not a 20 of one. So that consistency, a little bit of explainability, and maybe humbleness as well of, I didn't get that, you want to double check it. And that will really help me.
All right, great. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. So let's thank our panelists. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so we're going to do another 5-minute break. I'll just have one little point. Me personally, the ethical side, you can't outsource accountability. Can't do it, won't work. And if you know anything about GDPR, it's in stone there already. And I think people's attitudes to this technology will be the same. And ethics actually is very difficult anyway, because one person's view of good and bad are very different between different people. But the reputational damage, if you get this wrong, is way bigger than a cyber attack or anything like that. So I think people just need to use caution and think accountability, no matter where the chain ends at the end. So quick, another 5 minutes, and then we're going to do the next panel.
Specific use cases, fine.
I think Microsoft is something UI AI. They say That's the part. They're going to be chased after given offers that are too good to give, and they'll have nobody that actually has the legal training or have experience of managing funds and so I think that in the file system, there is that value will be absorbed into the large models in the longer term future. But in the meantime, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to take the data file system, curate it, out anyone that, so I'm an in-house lawyer, I'm a family's office, I want specific legal context of a particular sort. I don't have that knowledge, but I can plug it into my
It's a really good idea. I guess it comes down to the company joining that data. You're obviously experiencing personal identity and identity, credential stuff, and the contract. What a data source.
so it needs to be abstracted when it's curated.
Yeah, or you have to have something abstracted, or you have to have some level of role-based access, where no one can access it. And structure the database in ways with different tiers of access.
One of the issues with MCP, as I understand it, is the injection issue. That when I have access to sensitive data, I have a connection to the outside world, and I have content working in my prompts, then the MCP server can misunderstand the content as instructions. Yeah, so that's role number one.
Yeah, that's number one. Exactly. What is your firm?
So my firm personally is Faure. I'm back with this.
Okay, are you doing
Yes, I think so. My background is open law. He is working for one of the kind of smaller to mid-tier patent firms in the UK. Training in-house to work better on patent drafting particularly. His view on it is that it's just I come at it from the top end of the scale.
That's why I said, and you mentioned a few times today, it's like AI is a business decision point. You decide how you roll it out, where to roll out what access. And the skills that you have to close the system is pretty business service. Process. We spend some time to just sharing knowledge and connecting.
Yeah.
Very silent. That's why I think
he's early stage. So, I mean, my recommendation is way further down the line. I've been ruthlessly focused on lowest risk part, highest value. What I did was, I don't know if you know about the productivity grant in Jersey. We leveraged that. I basically picked some CEOs that haven't done anything with AI. Set up the work for that. And I said that return on that, which not only does what I spend, but then enable me to justify budget. And so we're kind of leveraging up from that. But I'm at the stage where we've done the basic implementation of the use cases we use. They are easily Yeah. 365. We've got about 1 to 5%. It's kind of what I expected. Off 50 years, it's returned about 2 FTE on the dashboard. Around about that. The next thing is really pushing towards either with grounding to get the organizational inspiration, which seems to be a non-starter. You mentioned it, it's the that you can get into the as far as I'm aware, you can't get into the right, yeah. I mean, it would, for me, it would be interesting. Well, I spoke to Qantas who was nice to make I said, one they said, we're not interested in it, nobody wants to, don't worry about that exactly what we want. I can find.
We can start again now. Okay then, so I think we're one seat line actually.
Thank you very much. All right. So yeah, hi everyone. So this is our next panel, which is all about AI and how it's going to impact society in a wider sense beyond just the finance and legal sectors. So yeah, maybe just to kick off, can everybody briefly just introduce themselves again, given that we've got a completely refreshed panel. So starting at the end.
Hi, I'm Josh Mesout. I'm Chief Innovation Officer at
You might want to switch your microphone on.
Is that one on again? Off and on again? There we go. I'm Josh, I'm Chief Innovation Officer at SIVO. I help run AI companies' infrastructure, tech and strategy, and occasionally turn technology off and on again.
Hi, Rob Stewart. I co-founded a company called Delta Outcomes. We're in the process of raising capital for an agentic impact private fund. So we focus on 3 key themes: climate action, biodiversity preservation, and human advancement.
Emma Martins. Spent my life in data protection, mostly in regulation, because everyone needs a black cat in the room, right? Michelle Ryan. I wear a few different hats. I'm on some boards, but also I'm an executive director of True, a sustainability consulting and advisory and reporting business, and also an executive director of NowWhat.Health, which is a medical technology platform.
Hi, my name is Sebastian Carpenter. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Health and Care Jersey. My thing is, how can we use technology to improve health outcomes for islanders, reduce health inequalities, and improve value for money. And then the last thing is improve the workforce experience.
I think everybody knows Julian. So yeah, I'll kick off with just a question to get some discussion started. Yeah, so how do you see AI improving people's everyday lives? And we've heard some things from healthcare, but you know, we can also hear about education or public services in general. And do you want to kick off?
Yeah, so just going back to Julian's earlier point, I think it's really important to understand in healthcare what problem we're trying to fix, rather than just throwing technology at it. So we've got a problem in healthcare. In Jersey, we've got an ageing population. For those that are over 50 in the room, you're more unhealthy than the previous cohorts of 50-year-olds, which is a problem. Likely to have more comorbidities, so there's going to be more activity in the future. We also are blessed with health inflation as well, so there are more treatments coming along, which are more expensive. We've also got a shortage of health and care professionals, so we've got an imbalance of demand and supply that we're already experiencing, but will only get exacerbated in not only the near future in Jersey, but in Western economies. So if you kind of think about and pull the covers back on that a little bit, it's how do we address all of those problems? How do we get into the preventative space so that we've got less activity? How do we make people work more efficiently? So creating more supply. How do we improve flow through the system? So again, increasing capacity. So AI and technology has got a huge amount to play in all of those areas.
I think what's really interesting, and you mentioned it earlier, you talked about workforce experience. And I think if you speak to pretty much any health professional, they did not go into it for the administration. Generally speaking, every health professional would rather spend that time with patients, they would rather spend that time learning. And actually at the moment, all of them consistently, here in Jersey but elsewhere, talk about how much time they have to spend. And there are rightly lots and lots of regulations and lots of checks and balances. But actually the thing that AI can do is help reduce that administrative burden. So we can improve their experience of actually, that's the patient experience and the workforce experience of actually spending time person to person, human to human. So I think that's where it's really valuable in the healthcare space.
I think the first thing I would say is that we've got to be careful about language, because AI is not one thing, right? And it's neither good nor bad. It's the quote, it's whatever we want it to be. To reframe the question possibly is to ask, how do human beings, how do we improve the lives of other people and ourselves using technology? And so my short answer to your question would be that AI improves the lives, and does for sure improves the lives, but has potential to improve lives where it's rolled out in a way, we've heard these words already this morning, in an ethical way, in an accountable way, with a real clarity of purpose and with guardrails and governance in place. And then it has the potential to do good. Without those things, it has the potential to do the exact opposite.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of really going back to basics. We heard from some of the previous speakers, how can AI help reduce employee anxiety and fatigue? And I mean, it's really, what is the power of the technology? It's sort of to make things personal, predictive, efficient. So it's all about reducing the burden of, being sucked into reading reams and reams of information, or doing, repetitive processes that the technology can really do on your behalf. And it's about freeing up people's time. And actually then, how does it make my life better? Well, it allows me to then spend time on more important things, like with my family or friends, and really sort of building those social bonds, which I think are at risk in today's world.
I think some really, really fascinating points there. And actually, I think just to zoom in on healthcare a little bit more, is healthcare has always been an industry where having capital and having access to resource and knowledge will give you an advantage. And I think what you really look at for the past few years around healthcare is actually things like precision diagnostics for oncology, that was traditionally like a $10 billion pharmaceutical company, now possible for academics and labs and biotechs to pick up. And one of the reasons for that is actually a lot of the engineering, planning, regulatory frameworks that the enormous amount of huge manual effort can be picked up by AI. So I think, in one regard, there's obviously a huge cultural change we need to make to be able to accept AI into our lives. But on the other hand, I think actually in regards to healthcare, is you're going to start to see a decentralization of gravity from these big companies with large amounts of capital, and actually being able to think about more innovative solutions. Actually, smaller companies being able to do more dynamic, innovative trials, more focus on precision patient needs, actually can be met now without having to need huge market saturation. So I think there's a really big opportunity here actually at the forefront of what's happening. I think in the meantime, we're still going to be churning away at step change until we get to these points where AI can make a big impact in our lives.
I suppose my view is I try to be non-biased as much as a human can be, because I love this technology. But I look at it in two folds. First of all, just at a personal level, the change this technology has done for me personally is massive. I'm dyslexic. I can now, what used to take me hours, I can write in Julian rubbish language and have the output tidied up and look really good in literally in minutes. And I'm not talking about getting the AI to write it. I'm talking about the AI to make it better and flow better. So at a personal level, I've seen these little things that go back to the time, getting back the time. We're working on a piece of work to do with producing board decks and minute taking and all of this. And the group finance officer at this particular company, I said, well, how long does this take you per month? He goes, I spend about 8 days a month on this. And he goes, it's all weekends because I haven't got enough time in the week to do it. I said, so what are you going to do with your time? He goes, well, I'm going to spend it with my family. And it's just little things like that. It's small on an individual level. But then when you look at the bigger society thing, humans have got massive challenges. As I said earlier, there's 1.5-ish billion people going to retire in the next 15 years. We're not producing enough children. We're not going to either. That's not going to change. There's only 54 countries in the world left that have a positive birth rate. And in 40 years, that's going to be 8 countries left. So we need to embrace this technology for the good that it can do, because if we don't, we're actually in a very sticky position. And that's the challenge for governments around the world now, is how they're going to balance this transition, because you can't just switch AI on in 15 years when loads of people retired. We've got to migrate to that. And it is a challenge of moving jobs, moving focus around. But ultimately, this technology has the capability of helping humans do what we do really well. So we're brilliant at making contextual, you've heard that word a lot, but we're very good at making contextual decisions. If we see concise pieces of information, especially visualized, we can see things and we can make decisions pretty good, actually, very quickly. But what we're not very good at, we were never designed to, is to take gazillions of pieces of information and process them to come up with that precise piece of information. And if you just think about it in that simplistic form, if we don't do anything else but get AI to do all of that, whether you're in health and it's looking at images and giving you its predictions and stuff, and then a doctor can take that information rather than the time it would have spent previously going through all of the images, down to just the legal or the finance industries. If we take all that mundane, the 80-20% rule, and we get all that mundane stuff done, the difference in society will be huge at a personal level, at business level, and the societal level.
I just wanted to add one point, because we're talking about here, what can the AI do? And I think, as you were saying in your presentation, at the moment it's what can it do, what can we try and make it do? The question and the conversation will turn around to what do we want it to do fairly quickly, because there'll be things that we say we don't want to replace that. Like, why would we want to replace creating music? I saw someone trying to create music. They're like, why would we do that? And I think what's really interesting, so on the Now What platform, we use AI agents for moderation. So when you've got community engagements and you've got people talking on the platform, AI can analyse all of those comments and all of those things and compare them to check that there's not hate speech, that there's not bullying, that there's not clinical information that shouldn't be being exchanged peer-to-peer. So AI moderation can do that, but you always have to have a human. If something gets flagged, you've got to have the human involved. But someone said to me the other day, you could change it so that people log on and there's an avatar that will speak to them and they can converse with the avatar. No, that's not the point. The point here is human-to-human connection. The thing that improves the lives of humans is connection. And so no, we probably could do that. We could create an avatar. That's the thing we could probably do, but we don't really want to. That's not the point.
Any other thoughts? How do you see AI improving people's lives? Maybe a question about what do you want? Yeah, one more final remark.
So going back to the earlier point about there being a disconnect between demand and supply, prevention is going to be much bigger on the agenda of all governments in terms of how do people have happier, healthier, longer lives. And it's not only short-term prevention, i.e. being able to look at a patient list and going, who on that patient list is likely to get unwell? So how do we then send community nursing out to those individuals and take earlier action and prevent admission into hospital, prevent conversion into beds, and then prevent conversion into long-stay care homes. It's also about, we're on the cusp of being able to take huge amounts of data and information from lots of different sources, so phenomic data, environmental data, and genomic data, and being able to put that together and create interventions, clinical interventions, which are targeted at you with a particular condition. So rather than treating the condition itself, target you with that particular condition. And that would take huge amounts of waste out of health economies. So at the moment, governments typically spend around 10% of their health budget on drugs and medication. So in the UK, it's around £20 billion a year. In Jersey, it's about £25 million a year. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because if I don't get the medication right in the first instant, you're going to come back and represent yourself to a clinician. And it's the waste of that clinical time as well as the waste of the drug expenditure. So there is going to be more opportunity, and that kind of technology is, I'm going to make a prediction here, it's probably five to 10 years away. We're certainly on the cusp of it, and we've got all of the key things in place.
Watch out, you might be in my slides next time I give a presentation like this. Okay, yeah, great, thanks very much. Predictions are good because it is important to forecast, because if you don't think into the future, you won't be able to plan for anything. So I don't actually mind incorrect predictions that much. It's just interesting to see. So maybe the next question can be, what role can AI play in tackling major social challenges like inequality or sustainability or access to opportunity?
Thanks. I mean, I'll kick off on that one. So, I mean, sustainability obviously very close to my heart. I think we're already seeing AI making measurable differences in sustainability. So, for example, helping businesses and factories use energy more efficiently, or optimizing how renewable energy gets added to the grid. So, thereby avoiding many millions of tons of carbon dioxide. And I think, with some of the companies that we research that offer energy efficiency solutions, I mean, we're already seeing them having embedded AI agents into their workflows. And I mean, they anticipate needs, they can adapt to changing conditions in real time, which then lets them optimize energy usage, and that leads to big reductions in emissions and operating costs. And I mean, in most instances, we've already seen them deliver sort of energy savings of 5 to 15%, which is significant. I mean, from my personal perspective as an impact investor, I mean, one of the most powerful roles that AI is already playing in our business is helping us, find and fund the companies that are genuinely moving the needle on, helping solve some of the world's biggest challenges. So that's climate change, resource efficiency, social inclusion. I mean, in our process, we use private AI extensively to help us identify, which companies have a proper impact thesis and investment case, and which are actually delivering, tangible sustainability outcomes. So, for us, what's great about the technology is it's not just making the investing faster, but it's also making it fairer, because it allows us to run really a repeatable process, and search some of the small and mid-sized companies to pick up impact signals and uncover these companies which are not the larger, more mainstream investments. And to me, that's where AI really helps tackle this inequality. So not by replacing human judgment, but by making sure that capital actually flows to the companies that are delivering the real world outcomes, wherever in the world they are.
I just took some really great points there, and actually one of the things we really need to do is get the tasks that we don't see as value adding to us automated by AI, and stop spending our time on things that are more critical, more important, things that involve like human intuition that you're realistically never going to get out of a model, things that kind of involve 40 years of learned experience in life and being able to put it in that place. But I think behind the heart of this actually is this conversation between kind of techno-feudalism, where there's these people who have more compute, better AI models, so they will run better businesses than us. And on the other half of it, you've got companies like Cursor who have 23 employees making 100 million AAR a year. And actually, I think what I really cement is the really core construct here is owning your infrastructure and having readily accessible access to your infrastructure. I don't know if anyone's known this, but the price of using ChatGPT via an API to use an agent has gone up 20-fold. And I don't think that's due to be slowed down. Actually, it's about making sure that if we're going to be solving these problems, it's not just us as businesses implementing them, it's actually how do we make sure that the public has open access to these types of infrastructure that they can build on? How does the bedroom entrepreneur make sure that they're using that? How does the research student in the middle of a university somewhere get on equal terms of the access to material?
Yeah, on this one, I think it's really quite difficult to find in the news the good stories, because the news tends to like to talk about everything that's terrible in the world. But there are, when you look at the environment, there's actually some absolutely amazing things going on using this technology. Some of the really simple things around, help certain species be more successful than they are currently. So there's one piece of work that's going on where a certain type, common salmon is causing a problem for other Pacific types of salmon around the world. So in certain rivers now, they have vision-based AI looking at fish as it starts to come up the river. And if it's not the right fish, it puts it into a tank and it gets collected. And then the right fish carries on and then spawns up in the river, and it's not the wrong fish spawning up in the river. So simple little things like that, that obviously a human can do that, because who would stand there for 24 hours a day, for months on end doing this or whatever. We're not designed to do that. So this is a good example of where this technology can help. And there's loads of other things actually if you Google it. On LinkedIn, I do one a week. I just find one and I stick it out there, because I think we need these positive stories about how great this technology is for us. And all of this thing, when you talk about the environment, if we don't get that right, then we won't have anything to be talking about if we're not careful. An interesting little stat last week, I don't know if anybody saw it, but we actually generated as a planet more renewable energy than we burned coal. First time it's ever happened. So predominantly push from South Africa and places like that, big solar. So the price of solar panels has dropped 99.9% since they came out in 1975. But then there's AI being applied to this technology to then, ensure that the power is delivered when it needs to be delivered. So there's great stories out there.
What's interesting, and that's an example of what we were just saying about making sure that it gets to the bedroom entrepreneur, and solar is a great example, because actually what there's been a huge amount of growth in is microsolar. So all these people who are off-grid, grids unconnected, they can't access it. Solar's gone from being thousands of acres of a massive solar farm. That was the only real economic way to make solar work. Because of the innovation, the energy efficiency, the technology, the investment in that, you can now have like 2 or 3 solar panels. We think about it here on our houses, and it's great. Maybe we get slightly cheaper electricity, or we feed it into the Jersey grid and it makes it, a tiny little bit less carbon intensive. But if you're off the grid in places like sub-Saharan Africa, and you rely on this for your farming, for your subsistence, you're really living a hand-to-mouth life. That's a fundamental impact. And that is what we need to try and do with AI. We need to make it so that it's accessible. 96% of UK businesses are SMEs. That 96% probably aren't really accessing much past public access GPT right now. And how do we make sure that those people get access to this same technology?
I'll just kind of make one quick point on that. I think we've got to be careful sometimes to be clear-eyed about the bubble we might find ourselves in, because I think it's something like 33% of the world's population don't have access online. So when we talk about inclusion and exclusion, we've got to ensure that we are as inclusive as we possibly can, because we sit here in a very extraordinarily privileged world that we exist in, talking about our wants and our needs and our priorities, but what about that huge percentage in the world that don't have a voice in that conversation, and who's going to give them that voice? And I want to I think AI can be hugely helpful around inequality sustainability. We just heard some examples, super interesting, but just picking up on the point that Martin made about targeted healthcare, that in itself could lead to targeted inequality, right? If you're getting information about people, what is happening to that information? So I'll always come back, and I hope I'm not a black hat wearer all the time, and I talk about governance and guardrails, not because I'm a pessimist, but because these things matter, and the outcomes affect you and me in very, very real ways. So for every positive, we've got to be clear-eyed about how we're going to deliberately, I think that was the word was used this morning, really deliberate and intentional, purpose-driven about what we're trying to achieve, but also some of the unintended consequences along the way, those people that aren't in the room today and don't have a chance to be in this room today.
So there are a couple of technologies that I think lend itself to improving access. One of them that we're starting to see being deployed in Jersey is ambient voice within GP surgeries, which means that you can have a conversation with your GP rather than your GP kind of facing the computer and taking notes as they go. That conversation is being captured and being turned into clinical notes. And that's giving technology the ability to make that contact more human and handing back clinical time. There's other stuff that's available in the UK around AI triaging. So using technology to triage you as a patient and directing you to the most appropriate point of care. And when that technology is used appropriately, it then releases capacity within the system so that those analog services can be targeted at the people with the most amounts of need. So it's not a rip and replace approach. It needs to be thought about in terms of how do we use technology to address those health inequalities, but very much having those at the top of mind when we're redesigning services.
Can I just add on the really interesting things you're talking about the model and how good is the model? It's based on the data that goes into it. And I think one of the points you made about health inequality is actually the data that it's trained on primarily comes from white middle class populations in a lot of ways. Because we don't have the data from sub-Saharan Africa because it's not online. So that I think is a really interesting point, that the way that it's trained and the way that it's doing diagnosis or spotting triage, we need to be so careful about the data we're giving it in order to make those decisions.
Just on that point, we've got to be very careful about the data in the sense that, if outside of corporate data, 90% of the rest of the data belongs to 5 companies, all US based, which also happen to be the 5 biggest tech companies in the world, most valuable companies in the world. And they're not prepared to share that information. They don't particularly use that information very well today, let alone what's coming. I also think that they're all cozying up to Trump because they want to see very loose AI laws in the States. And we've got to be very careful about what that is. And a lot of the models that you see out there in the world, we at Clairo do private models. Everything's deployed in a closed loop, but we're not nowhere near big enough to train a sovereign model. So we have to take what's known as a weighted model, which is open source-ish, but we don't know they don't publish what the data was used, how it was actually trained. So we don't actually know what biases are in there. We don't know what the data was used to create the model. There's all these unknown. I'm a big believer that the UK should have its own sovereign LLM. And I think we're probably going to see some of that. One of the small benefits of DeepSeek doing what they did was they proved that you can actually do a model with millions, not hundreds of millions. So creating a sovereign model where you actually have that traceability of what the data was used to actually create the model, which I think is going to be super important going forward. And as we look at the different things we want this technology to do, I'm a big believer, because we already do it now, is that you can have more and more specialized models. Because if you use a general model, it's got too much information, actually. It costs a fortune for the compute. So if you think about if you can create a model that's much smaller, that has all the information it needs to answer and do the tasks you want it to do, and doesn't have to worry about who was number one, 5 years ago, which you get from ChatGPT. You can actually create very small, super efficient, and improve the accuracy of those models massively. And I think we're going to see more and more of that type of technology deployed. And when it comes to health, we are talking about the most sensitive information that's out there. And bad actors can do all sorts of stuff if we're not careful. There's a lot of things like insurance companies where you get life insurance, if they can predict your life expectancy or the type of illness you're going to get and all of this type of stuff. It can do all of that, but should the insurance companies have access to that information? 100% no, they shouldn't, because then you're going to get inequality about who can afford and have insurance and who can't, which is totally wrong. So there is this balance, which comes back to what you said earlier when you talk about, there's so many great things this can do, but if we don't control what that does. And, I heard someone say one time, we've got to put all this regulation in. And, I've looked at the EU Act, and I don't think it's particularly good. It's not bad, but I don't think it's particularly good because they've done it too quickly, to the points that was mentioned in the last panel. But when you look at all of that, that sort of data, then, and what it can do and so forth, we just need to, we need to think that bad actors are going to do bad things irrelevant of what the regulations say. So, we've just got to ensure that we control the data that goes in the models to help us make the right decisions, especially around health. And to your point, there isn't enough diversity in the makeup of health information. We already know that different backgrounds, genders and everything affects you differently, the outcome. You might or might not get a certain disease, all sorts of stuff. So it was interesting, I'll just diverge slightly. There's a project they tried to get off the ground at Oxford a few years ago that I got involved with, where they wanted to create like a global library of data used for society. I don't know if you ever got involved with that. And they contacted the big five in the States, and every one of them said, no, you can't have any of our data. Not a single bit of it. They weren't prepared to share anything. And that's a problem, I think, for us and society.
Yeah, data is the most precious resource that is used to create these models, and so it's guarded incredibly stringently. I just wanted to answer the question also just as a participant of the panel, particularly with regards to access to opportunity. So part of my role as a professor is also to educate. So I lecture and I tutor students. And I also have to run these interviews to select, the students for the next year. And one thing that I see is that I can sometimes tell that students would have benefited a huge amount from one-to-one tuition during their school period. So often people, have creative ideas or think about things in a good way. You can see that people are thinking deeply, but in order to make someone a good mathematician, which is what computer scientists select for, you need a sort of trained, methodical way of thought. And good teaching does just make you smarter in that way. If you have good teaching earlier on, then you accelerate your learning through the rest of your school trajectory, and that can make a huge difference to your educational outcome. And one thing that's sad is that, in most schools where teachers are in front of 30 kids, there just isn't that time or opportunity for one-to-one tuition. And I think AI presents an enormous opportunity to give individualized feedback to kids who are still at school, particularly in the sciences and particularly mathematics. So yeah, I see a tremendous opportunity there to give people access to the training that currently is very difficult or expensive to provide. So unless there are any other comments on this, I was thinking maybe we could move on to yeah, and another question on how do we make sure that the benefits of AI are actually shared fairly across all parts of society. So that could also be a challenge. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I can kick off. I mean, this is a really difficult one to answer, I think, because, you know, certainly in my role, the nature of capitalism is that the benefits aren't always shared equally, and the rich tend to become richer at the expense of the marginalized. So the risk is that the benefits that we get out of AI, so be it productivity gains or leaner corporate structures, lower costs, resulting in greater profitability, that those are not used to expand corporate social responsibility initiatives, but only get distributed back to the shareholders. So, I mean, from my perspective personally, to make sure that the benefits of AI are shared fairly, we need capital that actually rewards real world outcomes and progressive companies that are actually focused on delivering broad-based tangible impact. So, I mean, you know, I mentioned how we as impact investors utilize AI. You know, it's not just a technology story for us, but it's a capital allocation story. And I think, you know, for us, through allocating capital to these companies who we believe are the impact champions and actually signaling to people and the market that these are very progressive companies doing amazing things like helping combat climate change or help underserved communities with education programs or access to financial services or any impactful activities. You know, we're doing our little bit to help facilitate the continued delivery of these benefits on an equitable and fair basis across society. But I think, you know, equally as important and more generally, so as investors and consumers, I think we also need to put more pressure on companies that are massively profiting off the AI, just to ensure that they're also allocating, you know, some of those proceeds to social responsibility initiatives, and also sharing out some of that benefit to society and not keeping it to themselves or to shareholders.
Can I maybe press on a little bit with a follow-on question? So you mentioned the things that need to happen, but do you have any ideas on how that can be ensured that it happens? So, you know, regulation is one key word there, but yeah, do you have any opinions on how we can get to that outcome that you're sketching?
I think it's just really sort of pressure from investors. I mean, if I speak from personal experience, you know, engaging with companies, and it's got to come from the consumers. I think if there's too much regulation, you know, companies might sort of shy away from doing that or dispute it. So it's really got to come from consumers and investors who are owners in these companies, and they need to motivate for companies to do more and share out some of the benefits.
What we've seen that's really interesting, and not specifically AI related, but it's to do with sustainability, and I would say that AI has a huge impact on sustainability in terms of outcomes. We've seen that debt within private equity funds is up to 2% cheaper within the fund, big private equity funds, if they are disclosing certain metrics about their investing businesses and instilling certain sustainability behaviours in those businesses. And so private markets are doing it, which means public markets will start to bear that pressure in the long run. And I think that's really interesting. There are financial levers that can be pulled that the populations you talk about, those investors and those company owners, are the ones that can press that. And particularly when we see, and I know you guys talk about this big wealth transfer that's coming over the next few years. As you have, we're talking about it at the coffee break actually, Gen Z have a totally different view on these issues than perhaps boomers do. Sorry for using the sweeping generalizations. But actually, when all that money lands in the hands of millennials and further down the generations, those investors and those asset owners prioritize different metrics than just financial returns. They are asking for different values because they themselves recognize that value isn't just measured in money. They have started to understand, education has started to teach them, realistic life experience has started to show them that things that they value are human connection, health, opportunities for self-actualization, creation, creativity. All those things matter to them more than just the core financial returns. So they're not giving up financial returns, generally. They're not saying, "I'll give the whole lot away," but they are saying, "We want other things." And that's what I think Rob's team are really trying to prioritize, is that we're not saying the money is for free. There's huge opportunity in a lot of these spaces. We just need to make sure that we're incentivizing those right behaviors, and money is often the way that you have to incentivize those behaviors.
So in HCJ, we've introduced a governance framework for implementing AI. And within that governance framework, we've got an ethics advisor. And part of that is to look at bias and how we're making sure that we're addressing all parts of islanders' health outcomes, that we're making sure that when we put AI in, we're doing it across society. In a different guise, I used to be the UK CIO for Optum, which is part of United Healthcare, which is a huge organisation, $350 billion turnover US insurance business. And in 2018, there was an article published by Nature magazine which revealed that Optum had been using a machine learning algorithm which had unintended bias against black population in the US. So share price tanked for a little while, huge reputational damage. So there are, you do have to think about this from a financial perspective, from a shareholder perspective as well, as looking at this from equality of access in terms of healthcare.
Thank you very much. I think some really good points there as well. But I think when we talk about making sure AI gets to everyone in society equally, there's a few really glaring gaps we've got right now. There's a number of countries where the monthly cost of education is still less than the ChatGPT subscription. As you think about AI getting to people who have the most amount of need, it's not us with Western education. It's the dispersed emerging markets where actually these things could have incredible amounts of impact. I mean, I think people always conventionally think of AI like a big bang implementation, but we've done lots of things that haven't been commercially viable, but have helped culturally change what we've tried to do. So I think 2 years ago, we started paying a UK council's heating bill because it was due to close down a swimming pool. And what we effectively did is we immersion cooled GPUs in that swimming pool. When they needed to use the heating, we would send workloads to it. The heat from the GPUs would warm up the swimming pool and put it across. We thought that was really innovative. We think that's a solution when people are going to the power in the council. How do we solve something like a council bill problem whilst having access to energy? I didn't get much press with that because the same week Elon Musk tapped a natural gas vein next door to his data center. And that made front page news for the fastest AI acceleration possible. So I think we just have to sometimes take a realistic sense of ownership and be like, that's not a sustainable solution. I agree that Elon Musk got 10,000 H100 set in 2 days. But at what cost did that come to on the planet? And I think having these conversations across it is all about us to vote with our wallets and think differently about how to implement these technologies. And if we prove that enough times, it will become the default norm. Like co-incubating AI technologies in areas where we can donate the heat back to a community, I think is a really good place to start.
I'm just going to say a quick point on, and it's a subject we could spend the whole day on. I think quality for this technology is going to come from education ultimately. James will tell me not to start on this subject because I get on the soapbox with it. But I think that we fundamentally have to look at how we educate our children now. We're still broadly educating our children the same as our parents and grandparents was done, and even 10, 20 years ago that wasn't right, let alone now. And if we don't empower younger people to actually understand this technology, use it, understand the ethical side of it, look what's happened with social media. It's so negative as a technology, yet it could be super positive, but it's actually not. And it's because we just didn't educate. And the same could happen here if we're not careful. So there's a bigger question around education anyway, but I think on this particular type of subject, AI, I think every child should understand how it works, the fundamentals of it. Everything should be taught at a very young age. And then they use it to expand their own knowledge through their education and on through their lives. And if we can actually nail that particular point and disperse that around the world, then I think that's when you would start seeing some level of equality. I was at a talk, off at Oxford actually, earlier this year, when I was talking about access and people's views and all of this sort of stuff. And I said, what do you do about people's views that everybody's equal? Because that's, it's been a thing that everybody should be the same. And he said this thing that I think is brilliant. We should strive for the quality of opportunity. And to my point, that's super important. But you can't get quality of outcome because everybody's different. But what this technology should do in a good place is that it helps each individual be the best individual they can be. I'm a big believer everybody's good at something. I don't think education helps that person necessarily find what they're good at currently. And hopefully this technology could do that.
I'll just make one quick point on that question, the original question. I do think there's a big disconnect between the business models. Julian talked about the big farm, the business models that now invade our lives across, and democracy. So I think that sort of gets to the heart of that question. So I think that disconnect means that the laws that we're trying to put in place, that the democratic institutions are trying to put in place, feel clunky, and they feel disjointed, and they feel segregated and siloed, and there's a reason for that. And I think it was said this morning, I think he said something on the lines of the people that build this stuff, that's the technical term, that's my technical term, don't always understand the risks. And I would go even further, say, I think maybe they do understand it. I think some of them just don't care because the financial rewards are so great. So I think if we step back a little bit from the detail, that disconnect really leads to some of the answers to these questions, and we can fiddle around at the edges with some of these, but actually fundamentally what is driving the narrative in this space, it's not democratic values anymore, if it ever was. And that there was just one final point here that I think it was you earlier said that the big tech may not be the ones to capture the value. And all I would say is I hope that's true.
All right, well, thanks very much. So I wanted to open up the Q&A to everyone here. So
if any of the speakers from the first panel are still here, please grab a chair and join, because this is a general Q&A, not entirely specific one to us.
Yeah, so previous panelists, please join us. And I'd like to open up the floor to questions from anybody in the audience. And should we speak up or pass the
So one of the aspects that I don't think we really talked about is sustainability, and is something that I'm trying to get my head around, is what are the implications for society, particularly an island society, of the prospect of diversion by companies of resource from payroll into platform providers?
Super interesting question. And I suppose someone talked about island demographics earlier, and actually we've got kind of a perfect storm of demographic issues, sustainability issues, and what's coming in terms of jobs. And I think as an island, we're in a uniquely difficult position that we're hugely, hugely reliant on income tax. So our economic structure relies first of all on a either expanding or at least consistent workforce that's paying sufficient income tax to fund what is a supply and demand issue, a growing cost. And actually we know that's not even true, because we've got a falling workforce demographic, and we might be losing other jobs. We might be losing our incoming migration for some of these jobs, some of the, I don't know, junior jobs in accounting practice, whatever it is. So it is a really interesting economic question, which I suspect lots of our local politicians will start addressing through their election campaigns, or at least they hope they will start thinking about this through their election campaigns. But we do have an economic problem that's the AI solution is helping our demographic problem because it will help our companies remain productive, but it won't solve for the economic problem because of the way we pay tax.
Yeah, well, just to add to that, I think that governments around the world will have to change their tax system completely.
to a whole new tax.
Yeah, a whole new tax, a whole new way of doing it. Because if you think about it, if we're suddenly going to make everybody 3, 4, 5 times more efficient, and we've got people retiring, and we generate most of our tax from personal tax, what's going to happen? It's literally going to collapse the tax system. So I don't know what they're thinking at the moment. Typical politicians only think for 4 years, so probably not them that's going to solve this problem actually. But it is it's a time bomb ticking away that's going to explode in everybody's lap if they're not careful.
I mean, I'm not sure there's a specialism for tax innovation. I can see Jason's probably got some answers on this.
They're not thinking about it at all. But the flip side to that, Julian, we were discussing this, and interestingly, this debate was on the radio on Tuesday, and so Howard Davis made the same point as me, so it's not just me being flippant. The flip side of that is companies will make more profits, good or bad, and that will be taxed. And of course, in Jersey, that's likely to be the tax bit of the company profit. So, good or bad, if jobs are lost, and we can debate whether or not that's the case or not, and profits go up, then that isn't necessarily the overall tax take going down. We just don't know that, and I don't know if that's been modelled at all.
Yeah, I don't know what the ratio between corporate tax and personal tax is.
I think government would probably prefer to have tax from companies because it's more regular, and the effective rate is probably not that different. So 50% versus rate.
So in government, we are thinking about it, and we're slightly alarmed. There is a report out, I think it's by the World Economic Forum, which says most Western economies by 2040, for every dollar of extra tax revenue that's coming in, that will have to be spent on healthcare. So we are thinking about the implications about that and what do we need to do, which means that things like digital and prevention are going to become more front and centre as part of health strategies to make that more affordable.
I only said you weren't because the Minister for Economic Development said you weren't. So
okay.
You might want to.
So we can say in HCJ we're thinking about the implications of that. I can't speak for broader colleagues.
Thank you. Caveat before I begin, because it's going to be quite sceptical, is I love AI, use it on the daily. However, I'm kind of maybe overgeneralizing, but hearing differences amongst the panel, which is always good, in the fact that we're going to take away the lower level jobs and the dirge, but the same way we're going to have to check that dirge, and it doesn't quite marry up in the way that that's being described to me. Because the whole point that I'm really hearing is, well, A, it didn't work out for Deloitte very well last week, but the point more is, what it seems to me is, we're outsourcing learning. That the whole point about those junior lawyers, junior finance going into the higher levels is, how do you become the higher level if there's no lower level? And when are they learning and making those mistakes and actually having that experiential knowledge to go forward? And I think education in itself, and Carl's gone now, but that's going to have a huge issue that needs to be resolved about how we teach our young people. But that question can be answered. But I think more fundamentally, we've been here before. PwC said, sorry, PwC, if anyone here, that 30% of jobs were at risk through automation over 5 years ago. We're seeing nothing, if not the opposite of that, and we can't hire people. So why, if automation, which is very easy to predict and doesn't have the black box issues, why is AI going to succeed where automation has failed? So there's a few things in there. But
I think one thing is that, like I said about succession planning, we recognise I'm an accountant, but I can speak for both industry, the accounting industry and the legal industry. We have to have experienced people. So when you say that automation or AI is going to get rid of people's jobs, well, it's going to get yeah. But there may be processes that it compresses. There may be things that it looks at that makes things more efficient. But actually, that means that the people are going to be learning more and more and more. on the good stuff rather than just, you know, when I was an accountant, I was learning, I was doing an audit, and it was like tick, 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 tick. I didn't learn anything from that. What I learned was from the interaction of what those results were. And that's what gave me the knowledge. So I do think that the knowledge will come from a different base, but people will be upskilled with using AI. You know, it will take away some, you know, onboarding issues, but it's not going to take away the fact that people have to review that work and they actually have to make better, non-fatigue decisions about the stuff that they're doing. And I think that's where its advantages will be. And the proof will be in the pudding. We're all theorizing here. What's going to happen is that we're going to put little bits in our English organisation. Other organisations are going to put little bits in theirs. And together we're going to go, yeah, that worked. Or actually, do you know what? Cost versus benefit, that didn't work. I'm going to use a different platform that does something very different. And that's all we can do is just trial and error. And we'll see in a few years what happens. But I don't think, like you were saying, people aren't going to lose jobs. People are going to change jobs, but also commerce is getting, and the industries, everything's getting faster. I remember when we used to write letters, or we used to do things. Now we've got emails, and it's all constant. Industry is moving so fast that the demand is greater and greater and greater. And as the demand gets greater and greater and greater, so forth, the efficiencies need to improve. So, and I don't know, we'll just have to see how things go. But I think we should just, you know, proceed with caution, but proceed with enthusiasm, because that's what we should do.
So there's one thing that you mentioned that I also wanted to comment on. So you mentioned something about moving away from doing drudgery work to checking work, right? Fact checking. So I sort of think that the AI tools that so firstly, I think that that's true. That's the way that AI is going to go. Like if we generate answers, then we're still going to have to check it. But I think that current AI tools don't get something right, in the sense that often it takes an equal amount of effort to check something as it takes to do the work from scratch anyway. And that's a terrible situation to be in. And one place where you see this really nicely is when you ask ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever to do a little bit of a literature review for you. You should get this nice summary of a whole bunch of websites that it's read. And then it gives you citations. It gives you the links of where I got this kind of stuff from. But if you really want to be sure that it's in there, you need to read those links anyway. And then you might as well do a Google search. So I think that this isn't a problem with the technology. I think that this is a problem with the user interface of the design of the technology. And we're still sort of socially experimenting with how to build a good tool for people to use, in a way that actually helps them to come to reliable conclusions and check the output in a way that takes less work than it does to do the work in the first place. And this is sort of one thing that I hinted at all the way at the start of my talk, where I'm actually in my research trying to start to thread more on the social science side of how do you create tools that actually make humans smarter.
I think what's interesting is forgetting AI, forgetting all of that narrative for a minute. What do we keep saying? And we say this at Jazzy Finance, we talk about it, the government just put a chunk of money behind it, skills. And we talk about what skills do we lack? And a lot of the time we think about education, and I'll be on your soapbox with you. We're not teaching, we keep saying that school leavers don't have the skills they need for the workplace. Are they going to learn those skills ticking boxes? No, because the skills we say that they lack are things like commercial acuity, the ability to negotiate, collaborate, create, co-create, engage in group-wide conversations. None of those things will be learned in a 3-year internship or a 3-year grad program where you're just ticking boxes and following through with drudgery. Where they will be learned, and so I can say this based on Logan, who works for me. Logan at the moment still does lots and lots of the day-to-day, but I can ask him to prepare a deck for me and it comes back in about 6 minutes. He can do a deck for me and the content is great, it comes back in 6 minutes, I check it, takes me maybe another 6 minutes. Previously, creating a new PowerPoint deck for me to go and do this or something else would have been a long job that Alex would have had to do, right? Logan doesn't have to do that. So instead, Logan's creating AI agents with James and the team, and he is doing far more. He's researching and innovating. He's using LinkedIn Sales Navigator and generating us new sales business. He's doing all sorts of things that he wouldn't have been able to do because he would have been doing the drudgery of sending contracts and writing PowerPoint decks. And so that's the difference, that he is learning skills far more quickly. He's being pushed into client-facing scenarios all the time, which someone in his position 10 years ago or so just wouldn't have had. They'd have been sat ticking a box.
I think this area has fundamentally changed so recently that actually it's up in the air, and we shouldn't come down with any certainty. Like if you look at Bill Gates's model of taxing an AI agent as opposed to taxing the human it replaced, I think that makes a lot of sense. But fundamentally this week there was a paper by UC Berkeley which was titled "Barbarians Are at the Gate." And in typical US academia fashion, it tries to compare it to the fall of the Roman Empire, but it uses an example where they got an AI agent to do an 8-hour long horizon planning to build a bridge. And it said that bridge ended up being 5 times the efficiency, less resource use, etc., than a typical human engineer would put in place. And this is brilliant. However, we have no tangible way for AI to build that bridge. And the current case of where we're looking at it is realistically actually an industrial engineer has to take the outputs of that, confirm it, ensure it meets business requirements, ensure it meets outcome. And then we're still building and developing what's the rest of the modality and the rest of the vehicle that makes AI enable changes in society. So I think at the moment, things like planning, testing, etc., AI is better than us humans. It's fundamentally things like production workloads, things about execution, relationship building. We've still got some time to come, and we need to make sure that whole loop of human interaction closes before I think we're in any risk of replacement.
I don't know if there are any Radio 4 listeners in the audience, but a few months ago there was a columnist from the Times on Radio 4 who talked about super processed data, and he felt that as a society we were heading towards having super processed data and starting to lack curiosity as a result of that. And he said something, we actually need more unprocessed data that was rich and fibrous in its nature, that was nutritious for us. And there's a bit of frivolity in that, but you can kind of get where he's coming from. And so I think we do have to be really careful about how we're using AI and make sure as humans we're not losing that sense of curiosity and not losing that sense of being able to take our own inference from raw data as well. So there are guide rails which are needed.
I think to look at it from like a technology standpoint as well, I think there are going to be innovations in AI which is going to increase the trust level of it. I've seen things on verification agents, which are very interesting, hallucination detection and correction, LLM as a judge and metrics around that. I think there is a whole field that's still going to be developed, which is going to do a lot of the automation work to check stuff. And if you have 3 experts, so let's say a verification agent, hallucination detection, LLM as a judge, or verifying one output, 2 of them say, please check this, then you'll probably have good kind of group think around what to check and what not to check. So I think, and we saw that with, I think, a lot of machine learning. It's great to build models, but you're still going to have all this monitoring, data drift that comes after deploying a model and obviously making it better with time. So I think there is a lot of innovation that will come off the back of the problems that AI causes, essentially.
Can I just share a real quick story? Just on your point. So my background is in creative arts, right? So I left university with a film and television degree. How I end up here is, who knows, right? But one of the first jobs I had was an internship with Tiger Aspect. And I was trying to bag a job as an assistant editor. And for a year, I was going through the rushes of Paul Merton's Holiday Showdown, which was a big ask, right? It's just going through reel after reel after reel of him, corpsing, right? And I didn't really learn how to be an editor until I shortlisted, a handful of rushes. I could go to the editing suite and learn how to edit. It took me a year to learn develop the skills to become employable. That's when I got my first contractor role at Gavsy Media a year later. So I think this kind of augmentation that can be solved with agentic AI would have reduced that period of time for me from going through this internship process and getting employed from a year to perhaps a month, 6 weeks. So I think that's where I look at it, the value that agentic AI can add to upskilling someone from a junior position to someone, middle management, whatever. That's the real value. That's the exciting thing for me. So just a quick story.
Just on the point of the data piece, I think it's right that we've got to be careful not to lose our own curiosity. But it's also a fact that the vast majority of data is a load of rubbish, and we don't actually need to look at it. To your point, you went through how many rules before you got to the ones that
Too many.
that actually allowed you to do something. If you magnify that up or multiply that up, with corporate data, there's so much data that's not needed to be looked at. And to your point, Rory, I think, and to James linking into that, I think what will happen is that agents will get to a certain level. I believe that agents should create a great draft. That's where I believe we are, and we're getting better and better at creating that great draft. But if the data governance isn't there, you haven't got the right data, then curiosity it just doesn't exist, because what you're doing is you're spending hours, days, weeks, months looking at pointless pieces of information that have no relevance at all to what you're doing. So this is where AI will benefit us, because it will get rid of all of that and go, here you go, out of the 2 terabytes of data, you only need to look at this 1 gig of data, and it's taken that drudgery away, and then you use, the human then uses its skills, its understanding, its the way it links it all together. And that will come in, how efficient AI gets at that will come in time. And so even though we're sort of saying, Rory, about the mundane piece and whatnot, I don't think that's the bit that people, I genuinely don't want to do that stuff. I wouldn't want to train like that either. And where I think if AI is applied properly is that we remove that drudgery out of a job and empower the employee and person to actually use the correct data to come up with something new.
If I can replace the word drudgery with failure is where we learn. And if we take away those failure points and AI gives us only the correct answers, then we will struggle to behave when it goes wrong. And I think that part can't be fast forwarded, is all I would argue from an educationalist.
No, true. I get what you're saying, but I don't think that's what we're saying about the data. If you've got, I'll use that scenario again, you've got 2 terabytes of data, only 1 or 2 gigabytes of it is actually relevant. You can still fail with the correct data. It just means that you're going to fail with the correct data, and you're only going to learn from that mistake. And I'm with you on that. I don't think AI should be replacing our ability to fail, because it is failure that teaches. When you were talking about algorithms sort of self-assessing themselves, when you think about it, when we make a mistake, it's really complex to know that we've actually made that mistake. Because typically someone else has told you you've made the mistake, and they give you all this information to point to the reason why you've made that mistake, and then you go, oh yeah, and then you learn from that. If you've got agents doing that, it's mind-boggling how that would actually work. I'm sure you're going to be doing that for a while, figuring that one out too, because it's really, really complex, actually. We take things and we look at AI as if it's going to do all this stuff, but if you think about what we do as human beings, it's incredibly complex. When Go was actually won by a computer for the first time, it's used roughly 3/4 of all Google's compute power on that day worldwide to do one thing. And that rests my case on that. It was a few years ago, they could probably do it more efficiently now. But we do parallel process at an unbelievable level compared to any architectural computer system in the world right now. All we're talking about here is actually getting rid of the pointless information and focusing our talent on the stuff that actually matters.
I think a really good addition to that would be the fact that we learn in a positive and negative reinforcement loop. Pavlovian psychology talks about this all the time. But actually, fundamentally, an AI can do that thousands of times in parallel. Remove any of it that's not needed, and then just give us the core learning we can take away. So actually, if you wanted to learn something right now, and you were looking at learning 1,000 pages of content, you can read the book, or you can have the AI summarize and tell you what you need to take away from it based on the question you're asking. And I think there's an amazing opportunity here to change the iterative feedback loop we push on learning. I think Michelle's point about getting AI into kids' hands early is actually everyone right now could have their own personalized AI tutor. And that could be the argument against, which I think is a very good point you've got, which is we're removing the negative reinforcement loop. If you did that wrong, try again.
It's got me, I caveated it, but I'm not AI, right? But it worries me because we're adults and we've gone through that experience with the neural, we talk about neural nets, and the irony is lost on me that the ages 0 to 6, for example, are the most impressionable years where those neurons are connecting. If we're outsourcing those neural connections and not reinforcing them as we get older, I worry for the future, not the now. Is kind of more my point that is probably a bit too bleak for.
And it's probably that question that we said: is it not what it can do, but what do we want it to do? And I think about it in a Lego context. If I told the AI I wanted to make a dumper truck, and I said I want to make a dumper truck, these are my Lego pieces. There's an app that it tells you how to make a dumper truck. Is my kid getting more value from that, or are they getting more value from figuring out how to make a dumper truck themselves? The latter. And of course, it's our responsibility then to say, what for our children especially, or for our vulnerable, talk about health, for our vulnerable, we should be making those decisions and not letting the AI take over that valuable learning.
I was about to say, one of the things we should be teaching children more than anything is curiosity. I think that's the biggest thing, because AI is great and it can channel. If we ask it to do a certain thing, it takes all the data set in that channel. But what it doesn't necessarily do is go, I heard something 2 weeks ago that someone said on the radio over there, and grab that part and then look how that works in parallel. What were the learnings in parallel to this? Unless you ask it to do that. So I think we have to build curiosity into our children much more, and also we have to educate them. And this is a much wider thing about understanding the amount of fake stuff and things that are currently they're looking at and scrolling through on a daily basis, because unfortunately their curiosity is that, and it's not on what can I do to better things, what can I do to make things, to look at the ecology, to look at people interactions. It's fine saying we need people interactions because we've got to teach them human bits, because they don't do that now. They don't do human interactions. Everything is done via 3 words. So I think there has to be a massive cultural shift for AI, the tech, to work by getting rid of some of the people's tech and just let them learn what's real and be curious about of the information that they get.
Another question? Yeah, one more question.
One more question. Thanks everyone for a great morning. Learned a lot. This question is me, Director at Mark. The most focus on transformer-based large language models. But just this week, there was the tiny recursive model from Samsung. This one researcher came up with a model with like 7 or 8 million parameters that beat Gemini 2.5 Pro with 1 trillion parameters, supposedly on like the RKGI benchmark, Sudoku, and maths-based things as well. At the cutting edge of the kind of model development, what are you most excited to see, and what are some things we should look out for in terms of model architecture advancements? And yeah, what are you excited about?
Wow, a real deep technical question. I love it. I wasn't prepared for that. So let me think for a second. What am I excited about from a sense of technical capabilities in machine learning? So yeah, no, I saw the paper and people are super excited about it. One reason why I feel like I'd like to see more before I get really excited about a new architecture is that we already know that you can take an existing architecture and do something more efficient by optimizing it and tuning it and tweaking things and maybe distilling things and stuff like that. And I think that this is an example of that. Something that we already knew we could do is much more efficient. And this is super useful. But I think the big question is whether we're in the crackle scenario or the pop scenario. And the thing that determines whether we're in the crack or the pop scenario is whether a new method increases the slope of that scaling plot. And there was no evidence in that paper for increasing the slope of that scaling plot. So that would that's what I'm looking for something that would really come out to me as wow. Transformers did that. If you looked at recursive neural networks that were before transformers and transformers afterwards, you really see a kink in the scaling plot. Now, in terms of things that I'm personally excited about, I'm excited about sort of slightly wacky stuff. So in the sense that the research bet, and this is why I'm at a university, not a big tech company, the research bet that I'm making is that actually we do need significant new technologies to really get to a kind of next level of intelligence. It doesn't mean that what we have now isn't useful, but just to get something that truly generalizes and can think beyond and reason beyond the data that was already given, I believe that we need new techniques. And the thing that I'm most excited about is trying to tune the learning algorithms to the physical constraints that hardware provides. So what's funny is that, yeah, you were saying this earlier, that our brain can be pretty good at Go. Lee Sedol's brain runs on the same amount of energy as our brains. He's a lot better, but the same amount of energy. But Google required using like gigawatts of electricity globally, right? Just to beat one person at Go. Now, the reason why I think that this is because we've had millions of years of adaptation of the learning algorithm that goes on in our brain to the hardware that it runs on, which is squishy little neurons. And energy usage was really highly selected for in evolution, because every extra calorie that your brain burns is another calorie that you're going to have to, gather from, ground where hardly anything grows out of all the time, So we were highly selected to have efficient computation, and our learning algorithm over millions of years, far before humans, co-adapted to being efficiently runnable in our hardware. Now, if you look at the hardware that we currently have, it's battling what are the physical constraints of what gives you efficient computation. So I shouldn't make this too long, but basically GPUs are not the naturally best way of giving the most amount of computation for the lowest amount of energy. But the reason why you build GPUs is because our current learning algorithms require the structure of computation that they provide. So what I'm most excited about is creating new learning algorithms that fit better with hardware that can provide computation at a lower energy cost. And I think we've got tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of factors of improvement to gain in terms of energy efficiency for that.
I'll just add something as well. I think LLMs are quite far away from what AGI promises. I don't really believe in the term AGI. I think superintelligence is a little bit better. And I don't think LLMs are going to be the end goal of that. They're going to be amazing for business productivity. But I think there's far more interesting architectures around world models, some of the stuff out of Facebook, out of with Jepper networks, if you know those. Josh and I have talked about those quite a bit. I think there's other learning algorithms based on other compute structures which are going to be much more significant for us. LLMs are great, but I don't know if they are going to be the end game for AI.
I think in the short term, there is already a massive focus on making models smaller because they're cheaper to run. But also, I think to your point about GPUs not being particularly great, they're not. And I do think someone's going to produce. There's loads of stuff going on on a silicon level that's going to change this space. And I think of it a little bit like ARM. There isn't practically a piece of hardware left on the planet that hasn't got an ARM chip in it. And I think something's going to come along of a similar architectural change like that will fundamentally change the space. And it has to, because if we carry on consuming electricity like we are, we will be like Ireland, where nearly 30% of the electricity consumption now is in data centres, which is just ridiculous. And so the government banned all data centres being built there. So that's not sustainable. let alone the environmental piece. No one can afford that, so it just doesn't add up. So I think we're going to see a fundamental change in the size of models, how accurate they can be with being smaller, but also run on completely different silicon to GPUs, which makes you wonder why NVIDIA is worth nearly £5 trillion. I don't quite get that one.
We should also, maybe to play the opposite viewpoint, is understand how lucky we were with what happened with AI, right? Which is ultimately Google put out a Transformers research paper. We're happy for everyone else to use it. A bunch of people who coincidentally all developed PyTorch together, got together with Elon Musk's money, trained GPT-2. NVIDIA were like, please use our chips. We're going to build all your acceleration for that. And that kind of forces NVIDIA Transformers viewpoint. If you look at it now, NVIDIA don't make any more Transformers models. Everything's hybrid and Mamba, all the things that are coming out the door. Google have started training a Transformers 2 model, allegedly, and their argument for being able to do that is, well, we build our own chips, so we can make our own acceleration. We don't have to wait for NVIDIA to catch up to us. And fundamentally, there's a lot of arguments right now that like novel neural architectures and things like Claude are actually one of the most important intellectual properties in the world. So I think this is the most exciting area we'll be in, and it touches hardware capabilities of what we can accelerate and what we can run. It touches how much companies are willing to share, and actually the role that academia had in making all those companies collaborate. And the bottom line of it is it's all consumer focused. So I think we'll have a viewpoint of being able to dictate how it comes together. Otherwise, it's looking at Dubai, the UK, lots of other places who are building in-country chipset processors. I think that's the other alternative is companies like Google will be able to ship a new generation model quicker because they own the hardware it runs on.
I think that's it.
So, thank you everyone for coming out today. It's been awesome to have do you have one more question?
No, yes, sorry.
We can do one more. We'll give it short answers though. It's you, is it?
Hi guys, I just wanted to bring up on the previous question asked before, because if we implement AI into businesses without the knowledge and education of the trainees, then the gap in the skill set of a trainee and the trainer will grow and thus decrease efficiency in the long term. So how important would you guys value the understanding of admin, sales, legals in their knowledge on AI and the workflows themselves, in understanding how to innovate and maintain curiosity and creativity?
I think it's really important that if we use any agents, that people are trained on what those agents do, so that they can mentor people who are looking at it. We can't just put these things in blind and say, yes, such and such, he's young, he can look at this stuff. We really need everyone to be on board, and that's why I think it was said earlier, right? It's a business decision and not a IT decision. And the business decision is that you put these things in, or you train these people up on the technology, and so they know exactly what it's doing and what the outputs are. And then we have a feedback loop. We have a CMP that measures what is the performance of this. How has this been? We're continually monitoring, the outputs of AI and how the junior and the person and the trainer interprets that. And only by doing that and learning and making mistakes and using curiosity will fundamentally improve. I completely agree with you. If we put something in that's like, yeah, this is brilliant, without teaching everyone else above it from the top down, it's not going to work. You're right. It's just going to create a massive gap, a skills gap, and it's going to fall over in the future.
There's an interesting debate going on because there's a few articles about computer scientists, graduates coming out of university not being able to get jobs, which seems just bizarre, but it apparently is a thing because people, especially coders, we don't need coders now because the tech's so good we don't need junior coders. But the problem is, if you don't have juniors, then you don't get seniors. So I think there's already a realization you just can't wipe out junior positions, and there's got to be a balance in that, or else you will run out of people. But then you've just got the demographics of society generally changing massively. So actually the number of people coming into the workforce is reducing massively now. So as long as we do have junior positions, we shouldn't actually break the system, but it's still going to require people to actually make sure they do have junior positions, or else it will break because AI is just not good enough yet, not for a while.
Just to come in real quick. So we're putting our money where our mouth is, right? We're adopting agentic AI into a number of our business processes today. And I think it only works if you can wrap it around a business outcome that everyone can subscribe to. Otherwise, what's the point? It's progress for the sake of progress, and that never works. Someone said earlier that 94% of businesses that try to adopt agentic AI fail, right? It's because they don't put the business outcome first. And I don't think agentic AI works from a grassroots movement alone. We need to get our engineering leadership teams, our executive leadership teams, our partners on board and subscribe to a shared vision. And that way it only works, right? So yeah, super exciting, execute it well, wrap it around a business outcome. Yeah. You'll make a few mistakes along the way, but ultimately I think you're going to win, right?
There's an old adage from outsourcing when it became big. If you outsource rubbish, you get rubbish back. And there's no difference here. It's exactly the same point. You've got to, in effect, implement agentic AI on something that is robust. If you put it into something that's not robust, it'll just fail. So the old adage, rubbish in, rubbish out, it's not changed. There's one prediction that I think will happen around agentic AI, is that I think the offshore space is going to be hit massively because those jobs have already left this island. So if you go, oh, actually, I'm not going to use Mauritius or India, I'm just going to get those low-hanging fruit jobs back into the automation room. There's a lot of predictions that's going to, one of the big areas going to be hit because politically it's really easy. Not laying anybody off in Jersey, are you? And because those jobs have left, yeah. But actually, if anything, you're bringing something back, and you're going to have a higher level of job in Jersey using the agents. So some of the countries like India and places like that have got a real challenge coming now. Actually, I think.
I think we need to wrap up now. And everyone's probably dying to get a bite to eat before going back for afternoon meetings. Just to end off, I want to firstly say a big thanks to the sponsors again. Josh representing SIVO and Dean representing Kudo. Really are amazing partners to us and help us succeed as a growing business. I'd like to say a special thanks to Mark. Amazing talk, really interesting. It was technical, but also I think low level enough for anyone to understand that. So thank you for that, and thanks for managing the panel. Big thank you to our panelists. You guys all added very interesting opinions from different angles, different knowledge. You're all knowledge experts by yourselves. So thank you for adding to the conversation today. And then finally, a big thanks to Callum and Tim there in the background. They've been taking pictures, doing live streams, setting up everything. So big thanks to you two for the help today. I'd love for you to get in touch with Clairo if you have any questions furthering agentic AI, what it can do for you guys. And the last piece of advice I would give to you, which I give to most people, is start very small, find a narrow problem that we can POC, anyone can POC, prove the value out on that, show people what the value is, and then grow it out. That's the best way for agentic AI to be successful for your businesses. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Did you get all the photos you needed?
I think so.